Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Harry Potter was Recusant's successor and married Tonks? Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story for granting us permission to use it in our YouTube video. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. The author's creation and the original story's link in the descriptions. Please do check that first. Now enjoy the video. And you be sure to give my love to Petunia. Mrs. Fig called as he left her house. Harry waved diplomatically as he began the short trek from Wisteria Walk to Privet Drive. Mrs. Fig was the local cat lady, one who once labored under the odious task of babysitting Harry in his pre-wizarding days. She recently took up the hobby of tea ceremony, trying the delightful varieties of foreign herbs, and watching her attempts at Japanese traditions would have been a wonderful experience, with the smell and taste of jasmine and mandarin orange drinks not ruined by the odor of stale cat litter and fur. The only positive thing about spending time with Mrs. Fig, aside from it being preferable to spending time with his relatives, was the free access to her television and, as such, the news. Nothing particularly interesting had been reported since the start of his summer holiday. Honestly, all he got from the experience was an entire recording studio's worth of commercial jingles and slogans stuck in his brain. He was humming one such jingle when the sound of blaring sirens broke him out of his reverie. He froze at the noise. He'd never heard them before, or at least not in real life. If anything, they sounded like World War II air raid sirens. Was London being bombed? Surely, they would have all been alerted to a coming invasion long before enemy planes arrived. All earlier concerns of Death Eaters and magic fled from him as he remembered a much more likely possibility. A possibility that until the fall of the Berlin Wall, just a few years ago, felt all too real to those raised in the Muggle world. Was nuclear war upon them? Harry would have laughed at how woefully unprepared most purebloods would be if it was, but he was too busy sprinting the remaining distance back to number 4. The yellowing grass of the Dursley home greeted him as he approached, and his aunt did the same at the door. "Oh, thank goodness," she squealed as she ushered him inside. "Dudley is already downstairs. Vernon is grabbing anything edible. Take whatever you need from your room and join us in the basement." Quickly, Harry blinked at the utter strangeness of seeing his aunt in such a state. Was Petunia concerned for him? Somehow the prospect of the panicking woman giving a single damn about him terrified Harry more than the prospect of becoming a shadow on the wall. "What's going on?" he asked, barely able to hear his own words over the sirens. Petunia opened the door to the living room and pointed inside. Harry strained to hear the newscaster. "Thank Merlin for subtitles. This is not a drill. Reports from NASA and the International Space Station both confirm an approaching asteroid due to strike the United Kingdom. Everybody is instructed to find a bunker, subway, or basement and tuck in. I repeat, an asteroid? A bloody asteroid." He couldn't decide if that was better or worse than worldwide nuclear war. Probably better. Less radioactive fallout. And if it's just one asteroid, hopefully only England and the surrounding countries will be wiped out instead, if the whole world. Though Harry would prefer to live long enough to someday kiss a girl and not die at all before the ripe old age of 384. "Hedwig," Harry called as he ran upstairs. He had let the snowy white owl out for a flight just before going to meet Mrs. Fig. The owl had long since lost its nocturnal nature in favor of spending her days awake and in Harry's company. He was beginning to regret having such a strong bond with her. She wasn't in her cage, on the perch beside the window, nor even visible on the neighboring rooftops. He could only hope she was smart enough to get somewhere safe. Reflecting on his past experiences with her, he reckoned she was. Fortunately, all of his belongings were in his room instead of locked in the cupboard downstairs as in previous years. Unfortunately, they were scattered in such a manner as to suggest the asteroid had already struck. He prioritized things that were irreplaceable and as close to being worth dying for as any non-person could be. He snatched up his small, ratty backpack and began packing. The Marauder's map lay under his pillow for ease of perusal, and his invisibility cloak was stuffed behind the headboard for ease of escape. So naturally, he grabbed those first. He left all of his schoolbooks and clothes, as those could all be repurchased, save for the 4 years of Christmas sweaters Mrs. Weasley had gifted him, which he stuffed into his pack alongside his father's cloak. He snatched up a few other useful doodads that were within easy reach, like the sneakoscope and omnioculars, and shoved them into the size pockets along with the NIF 8E from his potions kit. It was as he turned to bolt back downstairs that a sharp pain on his ankle made him yelp. The sight of the miniature dragon from the first task desperately clawing up his leg in search of protection reminded him how serious of a situation was. If even inanimate objects were panicking, then maybe it was time to get his arse into gear. He pocketed it along with the other doodads and stuck his head out of the window one last time. Hedwig! He stopped midway through calling for his faithful companion when he caught sight of the sky. The sky was alight with a bright fireball, with many smaller ones all about it still too far away to make out in any detail. He wasn't experienced in identifying incoming space rocks, but something about it seemed off. Why was it falling so slow? If it was already in the atmosphere, shouldn't it be coming at them a little faster instead of looking a second sun? He pulled the omnioculars back out of his pack and held it awkwardly against his glasses. Turning one of the many dials on the haphazard device allowed him to zoom in on the incoming ball of death more efficiently than with any telescope. What he saw boggled even his mind. That's no meteor. He gasped as he made out what looked like an arrowhead made of silver. That's a spaceship, and so it was. The obviously artificial nature of the construction, to say nothing of the red paint, spoke of intelligent design. As if his life wasn't bizarre enough already. Now there were aliens. Hedwig! He yelled out through the window one last time. It was then that something even louder than the blaring sirens roared overhead, and he looked up to see balls of fire and rock shoot over the 2,000-year-old city and hopefully into the English Channel where they would harm the fewest people. Okay, those are definitely meteors, Harry said to himself. Harry banished all thoughts of extraterrestrial visitors and avian friends from his mind as he lumbered back downstairs. He stopped just before reaching the bottom. He could hide in the basement with the Dursleys for an indeterminate number of days. With the Dursleys, until rescue teams came in to dig them out of the rubble. With the Dursleys, with no running water or personal space. With the Dursleys. Or, I'll take my chances, Harry decided aloud. He sprinted back upstairs and snatched up his firebolt. It was close to being on the list of irreplaceable things, having been a gift from his godfather. But he had figured Sirius would be happier to find Harry alive without the sports broom than dead grasping onto it like a family heirloom. Now it was his best bet to get somewhere he was almost certain could survive an asteroid. Or a spaceship falling so fast that it might as well be an asteroid. Boy, where are you going? Vernon called after him as he reached the front door. He looked back at his aunt and uncle standing beside the basement door and felt his insides go cold. If anything cemented his decision to leave in search of a better bunker, the look of genuine worry on his aunt and uncle's faces, directed at him, did just that. Harry fled from Privet Drive. He knew the firebolt could exceed speeds of 200 kilometers per hour and hoped that he could reach Gringotts in record time without worrying about breaking the statute of secrecy. Emergency clauses and all that. The apocalypse seemed like it would fall under reasonable exceptions. But would the goblins let him in and down to his vault in time? He was sure there was some precedent about vaults doubling as safe houses in emergencies like this. They had done so during the Great London Fiend fires in the 17th century, at least, and during the bombing raids of both world wars. Harry promised himself to never again sleep through a lecture from Professor Binns if he managed to get out of this alive. He further promised that he'd attend the ghost classes into Newt years if he lived that long. He kept glancing over his shoulder as more meteorites and metal debris peppered the city around him like a great, flaming hailstorm. Soon enough, he was praising Oliver Wood's name to the heavens, as he put into practice the hundreds of hours of Quidditch training the team captain had forced him through. At the time, practicing bludgeon dodging during a thunderstorm seemed unnecessarily cruel. Now it seemed like child's play. Shit! He screamed as he dodged each and every burning projectile. Shit, shit, shit! He yanked into a dive, just as what could only be described as a high-tech fighter jet nearly clipped him and pulled back up in time to see the vehicle tear through an office building to the right of him. When he pulled his broom horizontal again, it was to confront the challenge of evading 18 stories of glass and steel descending upon him like the foot of a Greek titan. He pushed his broom to the upper limit, but there was no chance of him clearing the distance necessary to avoid being turned into a waffle. Not a pancake, a rebar and glass-studded waffle. Bombard! He yelled, pointing his wand to the window directly above him. He raced through the shattered window, wand still in hand, and began a fast-paced game of dodge the metal filing drawers and staplers. He weaved between the free-falling furniture, cubicle walls, and human beings as best he could, but had to resort to several more blasting curses to pass through the walls unscathed. Bile rose in his throat as he tried to ignore the guilt of knowing he couldn't save any of the men or women that flew past him towards the ground and their inevitable death. He thanked the heavens once more, this time for the small mercy of being unable to hear their screams over the rushing wind in his ears or crumbling of concrete and shattering of glass all around him. One final blasting curse removed another window from the opposite side of the building, which was now effectively the ceiling, and he ascended into the open sky once more. He had lost control of his broom during the last push and was spinning out of control upon his exit. In the time it took for him to wrest control of his momentum and catch his bearings, and before he could even try to spot a landmark to guide him towards Diagon Alley, he realized that his time was up. There was a brief pause, a sudden silence as if the earth itself were bracing for impact. He saw it, a bright flash of light as the ship dove into the earth like the head of a spade. It kicked up mountains of dirt, buildings, and pipes the deeper it dug. Soon an outright tsunami of soil, rock, metal, and fire was sweeping in all directions from the impact site north of London. From his distance, it could have almost been mistaken for an actual tsunami of muddy water. It was surreal, witnessing destruction so profound while being far enough that the sound had yet to reach him. And so, Harry sat there on his broom, mesmerized, as he waited for the end to come. It was all so indescribably beautiful. The shockwave from the impact deafened him as he was tossed about like a rag doll by the scorching hot, gale-force winds ahead of the wave of earth. All was blackness after that. Pillows normally went under a person's head, and yet for some reason, when Harry next awoke, it was to find one on top of his instead. The days of recently waking combined with the disorientation of his blown-out eardrums stalled his efforts to decipher the mystery of the pillow placement. A mystery confounded by the incredible discomfort of where he was laying. Pebbles, branches, crushed glass. These things a good mattress do not make. The uncontained fire not 5 feet from his head didn't make for a particularly safe nightlight either. Hedwig, I'm not an egg. He chided the bird as his brain caught up to reality. His ears were still ringing, and he could barely hear his own words as they left his mouth. Now he had hearing to match his vision. Great. Hedwig didn't budge an inch from where she was nestled on his neck and chin. Her feathers ruffled and prickled as she attempted to puff up and appear larger than she really was. She continued her guard over him, swerving her head every which way with a glare that dared any potential threat to approach her prone master. It was actually rather cute, dare you say touching, but he had things to do. She barked in annoyance as he tried to sit up, catching her in his arms as she slid down his shirt. He didn't feel any of the increasingly familiar pain attributed to broken bones as he did so. He felt plenty of pain, to be sure, but it was pain of the body-wide bruise forming alongside his sprained well. Sprained everything. I know I've told you this before, Harry said to the bird in his arms, but you're the most brilliant owl in the world. His compliment did not sate her protective rage, and she continued clicking her beak threateningly at the world around them. If only he could get her to understand how amazing it was that she'd managed to track him down in the aftermath of such an apocalyptic event. He appreciated her more in that moment than ever before. She was acting like a nesting mother. Now that Harry thought about it, he had to wonder if she'd mothered any chicks before. She did sleep in the school Olery, with hundreds of other owls. Did they? Probably. But he had more pressing concerns at the moment than Hedwig possibly getting it on with Malfoy's eagle owl. Accio glasses, he said, or presumably said. He made the motions with his mouth and hoped for the best. His glasses flew to him in seconds, and he snatched them with the same hand his wand was held in. He caught them more with practiced reflex than actual hand-eye coordination. He didn't bother checking them. They were surely damaged beyond non-magical repair. Still holding Hedwig in one arm, Harry knelt down and placed the ruined spectacles on the ground before tapping them with his wand. Oculus Reparo, he intoned, this time focusing on the vibrating in his chest as he spoke. Funny thing about the Reparo spell and its variants. It can only repair something using the physical material present. It did not conjure or transfigure new material for the task, because that was a more advanced repairing spell learned in Newt Year. For example, if you were to use it on a broken window with a few of the shards missing, the end result would be much thinner than the original window, as it would recreate the original shape using the remaining glass. His glasses were little more than a twisted frame, but with concentration the spell allowed him to use the glass from around him as a substitute. And there was plenty of the stuff. With step 1 of his master plan completed, he donned his sensory aid and got his first good look of London post-alien invasion. Yup, that's about what I expected. He mumbled to himself, ears still ringing but slowly coming around. The city looked like hell. Actual hell on earth. Every one of the classical London homes on the street was either demolished or burning. Mostly burning. Every tree was either uprooted or vivisected as if struck by lightning. More likely, they had simply been torn asunder by the great winds. Trying to traverse the previously flat terrain was made all but impossible by the brick and timber innards of the identical homes spilled along the road like confetti. And also fire. What really stopped him dead in his tracks was the jagged fissure cutting through the park he had landed near and the street he stood on where it had uprooted a few homes. Harry was on the half of the world that hadn't been lifted by the cosmic impact, and he could see water pooling on the fractured earth below him from a waterline that jutted cleanly from the cliff just 3 feet from him. Circumventing this latest barrier, Harry soon discovered the sky was an even more confusing mess. Great, black roiling clouds told of a hurricane intent on swooping down and scooping them all up, but there was little accompanying wind beyond a gentle breeze. Stranger still was how alight the world was. Vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows painted the clouds like during a sunrise, usually in bright flashes of lightning. How long had he been unconscious? It was sunset when Harry'd made his daring escape. So either he'd only been unconscious for a few seconds, or it was dawn already, or dusk of the following day. A longer examination of the city around him proved that it was, in fact, late in the night. It only looked like daytime because of the roaring fires rampaging across the city. Did he mention there was a lot of fire? Because there was a lot of fire, right? I should probably get moving, girl? Harry asked Hedwig rhetorically. Hedwig had finally started to calm down and was nestling into his stomach. No doubt just as exhausted as he was, if not more so. He decided to let her be, tiptoeing through the park so as not to disturb the resting bird. Harry kept an eye out for any aurors or hit wizards. There was a chance that nobody detected all of the magic he'd used thus far, but his usual luck wouldn't allow for that. They probably just had bigger issues to tackle than reprimanding him for his use of underage magic. Somewhere on that list had to be helping underage witches and wizards who, like himself, probably thought to use a spell or two, hoping officials would detect it and track them down with the trace. Children who, like him, were in desperate need of rescue. He didn't bother using another summoning charm for his firebolt. There was zero chance of it being in any better shape than his old Nimbus. Sirius would be so disappointed. Well, probably not, but Harry would feel a great deal of shame next time he saw the old dog. Point me, he mumbled as he reached the foot of the hill/plateau/catastrophically raised shard of earth. Following his wand's directions, Harry turned right from the direction it pointed in order to keep east until he spotted a twisted and crumpled street sign jutting out of a brick wall. The thin metal sheets, declaring the names of the cross streets he stood upon, hung limply. Or at least he hoped they did. For all he knew, this street sign could have been flung here from halfway across the city. If his mental map was correct, he was about an hour's walk from Diagon Alley. Unfortunately, his feet were already beginning to drag in protest of the pain in his joints from the crash. His aching muscles were even more insistent that he be still. Perhaps he ought to listen to them for a change? He didn't want to disturb Hedwig, but he had nobody else to rely on at the moment. Oddly enough, she seemed altogether nonplussed by being prodded awake and placed on the jutting pole. She was being especially agreeable today. "All right, girl, I need you to get help," he told her as he glanced around at the singed newspapers and plastic bags billowing down the streets. "Hang on." Disregarding any chance of writing a proper message, he struggled to detach the placards indicating the names of the cross streets. One piercing hex, and some MacGyvering a bit of wire from a demolished street lamp later, and he had an oddly proportioned pair of dog tags, indicating exactly where he was. "Okay, take this to Dumbledore, or Sirius, or whoever is closest. I'm sure they're bright enough to figure out my meaning," Harry told her. She grasped the wire of the street sign necklace and flew away without any protest. And so, Harry was left alone in the barren street. His only company was the sound of emergency helicopters overhead, crackling flames, and the rustling of debris in the light wind. The occasional lightning bolt would streak across the black sky, with smaller sparks dancing silently from within the dark masses. Red and violet lightning bolts dyed unnatural colors by the chemicals in the air. With nothing better to do, he pondered how this could be. Nothing was up there but dust and smoke. It wasn't a natural storm head. How was it producing lightning, and so much of it? He reasoned that the raging fires all over the city, and likely beyond it, were releasing a great deal of moisture into the air. There was also the impact itself, which must have outright vaporized several square miles of matter. So that was all probably up there too. So with the cold moisture up there and hot fires down here, there was definitely the temperature difference necessary to make lightning. And plenty of conductivity too. Hell, there was so much raw elemental energy that it was amazing the clouds themselves weren't spontaneously combusting. Harry took a deep breath. Thinking helped to keep him calm, helped him relax and ignore bodily pain. Most of it was his attempt to simulate Hermione's company in his own head. Her habit of throwing verbal diarrhea by expo-citing trivia or contemplating out loud could always put him at ease, especially when it came from a place of concern. He really could have used one of her lectures in the previous weeks. Even a written one. Something to keep his mind off of Cedric or Voldemort or Fudge. But she, and worse Ron, had not deigned to send him a single letter. He realized with a pang of guilt that he didn't care about any of those things anymore. Or at least not in that moment. He couldn't bring up the boiling terror at the memory of that thing rising out of the cauldron, the steaming hatred for Pettigrew, nor the icy remorse for failing to save his fellow champion. He felt all too empty, not in shock from the cataclysmic crash. He certainly wasn't too tired to feel emotions, which was a level of exhaustion he'd experienced more than once. No, he simply felt empty. The events of the last few hours knocked something loose. Seeing all of the death and destruction around him made all of those other things seem so minor. With a stir, he realized what it is. Perspective. Harry Potter had been bequeathed by fate a truly gargantuan frame of reference to compare these past tragedies to. How many millions of people died in that impact? How many millions more were injured? How many millions more still will never be able to see their homes or worldly possessions ever again? That crater will in all likelihood be there forever, if not because of how unfeasible the prospect of filling it and repairing the rest if the destruction would be, then at least in memoriam to the tragedy. From that point of view, with that perspective in mind, was the ending to the Triwizard Tournament really all that traumatic? One person died. Harry got a few injuries. He survived 10 minutes or so in hell, but survived relatively unscathed. Bruised and bleeding, but alive. That was nothing. All of that was nothing. This was the real deal. This is what all other things to come would be compared to in his heart and mind. He prayed whatever form the coming conflict with Voldemort and his forces took, that it would seem as pitiful in comparison to this day as that day in the graveyard did. Somehow he doubted it. Harry shook himself to rid his mind of that malaise. Better to take stock of my blessings, he mumbled to himself as he emptied his pockets and yanked the increasingly uncomfortable clothes from inside his shirt. 4 hand-knitted sweaters, his father's invisibility cloak, the Marauder's map, the sneakoscope, the toy dragon, the omnioculars, a few galleons, and his wand. That was it. That, and the clothes on his back. This was now everything he owned. He hadn't even thought to grab the photo album gifted to him by Hagrid. That one hurt the most. But hopefully the lovable half-giant could recreate it for him. Hopefully it was replaceable. Most of these things weren't. And neither was his life. That thought brought him out of his funk. Harry, ignoring the cracking protests of his body, stood back up and wiped away the offending tears from his face. He needed something to do. Something other than mope and wait to be rescued. There, not 3 blocks away, jutting over the surrounding rubble, was the office building he almost died under. The place where the smaller spaceship crashed. If not to sate his curiosity, then at least the prospect of rescuing someone or something would make the trip worth it, right? He put everything back into his sack save for what he'd need for the small adventure. His wand, the invisibility cloak, and the omnioculars. He almost brought the map too, just out of reflex, but put it into the bag, too, seeing as it was completely useless outside of Hogwarts. Then he began the short walk. A walk that turned out to be even shorter than he expected. He soon came upon a long, jagged wound in the earth leading to, or more likely away, from the building in question. It was already starting to fill with ashen water. A bit of mental calculus told Harry that his target would no doubt be at the end of this artificial riverbed. He followed the trail for a good quarter-kilometer, stomping in the puddles and minuscule streams along the way, before he found another one. A smoother one made by a falling rock. A falling rock that was still intact and had a lot of metal parts sticking out of it. Wait, so the asteroid was a spaceship too? Harry asked to nobody in particular. Hangar bay doors and other mechanical miscellany jutted out of the rocky surface every which way. All of it either scorched or melted, just as the duplex-sized meteor itself was. So the asteroid wasn't a ship in and of itself, but a mobile base of sorts? A base with hangar bays and likely other necessities like a barracks and kitchen. A space station then? Whatever it had once been, it was rubble now. Rubble scattered all over the country, if not the continent. He was more interested in an actual spaceship. He finally donned his invisibility cloak, feeling rather uneasy about being seen by an alien before he saw it, and continued along the gouged earth until he reached a place where the water collected into a shallow pool. There was nothing there, unless you count a half-crumpled flower shop something, which Harry did not. Thank you very much. Maybe the ship hadn't survived the impact? No, that didn't pan out. There would have been bits and pieces of the black and red vehicle, and he hadn't seen any on the way here. There was the rather obvious possibility that the flying ship had, despite its nature as a flying vehicle, flown away. He went to school in a place where no position in space was exactly fixed after all. So that should have been his first guess. This idea didn't pan out either. If a jet crashed into that building before taking off, then surely it would have had to lift and then drop at least some debris, or drag some backwards, or at least scuff the crater. It certainly wasn't sunk beneath the waist-high puddle. He took out the magical binoculars and looked for anything out of place, reticent to approach such a suspicious sight. He couldn't quite put his finger on why, but something about the scene was off. The way the support beam for the floor sat at an angle. The way the timber of the building was bulging upwards into the ceiling. How pieces of glass and would seem to float in the air. It's invisible. He gasped before slapping a hand over his mouth. Something about advanced aliens developing with technology what was exceptionally rare to the magical world, not to mention near and dear to his heart, was just too mind-blowingly cool for Harry. The sudden hiss of steam and glittering rays of white light coming from where he knew the ship to be was also pretty cool. A landing platform dropped in the puddle, revealing the inside of the still, invisible spaceship. It was dark inside, save for the runway-style lights along the ramp leading up and inside. Out stepped 2 people, a man and a woman, judging by the comparative shape of their waists and shoulders. Even this was hard to ascertain due to the heavy black and red armor they wore. The full body regalia, to say nothing of the pointy bits sticking out of it, did not speak highly of their possible friendliness. Neither did the jetpacks or sidearms they carried. It was silly to think that maybe, just maybe, their alien visitors would be peace-loving beings. Maybe even justiciars from a world where knowledge of magic wasn't so esoteric and who were willing to fight the looming threat of Voldemort. No, clearly that was asking a bit too much. The seismic scanners picked up something moving towards our position. The female, and her voice was definitely female, told her possible superior. Seismic scanners? Ignoring the obvious mystery of how these visitors spoke flawless English, Harry scoured his mind for what that could mean. Seismic? Seismic? Earthquakes? Harry certainly hoped there wasn't one of those coming along. There was also a seismograph which detected earthquakes. So maybe that's what it was? What type of being and from what vector? The male said, well, no, seismographs just detected vibrations in the ground. Probably. So, if they have seismic sensors, they would be much more advanced. They could pick up much smaller movements in the earth, like a nearby crash, or footsteps, bipedal, less than 150 pounds. Southeast, she answered, pointing in Harry's general vicinity. Yup, footsteps. They have sensors that can pick up footsteps. They have sensors that picked up his footsteps. I don't see anything. Are you certain you calibrated the sensors correctly, Cast? The male said, I assure you, Commander. My engineering droid has gotten all of our sensors back into top shape. The ship proper will be likewise functional again soon enough. The female Cast snipped back. Harry wasn't exactly sure where she ranked in comparison to a commander of whatever military force these two hailed from. But these two certainly weren't in equal standing. Well, when in doubt, the commander said, lifting what was clearly some kind of gun. Light it up. Cast finished his sentence, drawing an identical firearm. And so they did. Harry hit the ground as fast as gravity would let him, just as a hailstorm of bright red bolts scoured the world around him. All in all, first contact with alien life was going about as well as could be reasonably expected. Want your story written? I take commissions now. You can pay me to write your fanfiction or original works. My prices are as follows. $25 per 1,000 words of fanfiction, with some wiggle room. I don't pad my work. You also get to video chat with me as I type the first chapter. $25 per 500 words for original works, so anything that is not fanfiction. I also charge $25 per 500 words for smut or fetish materials. Price is subject to change in the future. Check with me. Become a patron. NonsensicalRants. You can also still become a patron for $1 to get access to future chapters 2 weeks early and vote on which stories I update next. The Chase. Chapter 3. The Chase. Harry didn't dare breath as he huddled pitifully in a trench below the onslaught of laser bullets. Wait, no. Not lasers. He could see the bolts. Plasma? Whatever. Might as well call them death bolts for all the good identifying their makeup would do him. Right now, he needed to think of a way to get out of there. Should he fight? Could he take them? He was invisible, and these erudite aliens might be unaware of magic as a phenomenon. Or maybe you should just stop thinking and start doing. That's always worked out better for him. And so, when his obsidian-armored foes finally relented, he leapt up and fired a quick pair of blasting curses before running back the direction he came. He didn't peel his eyes off of them for a second, an action he soon regretted. They literally shrugged the blasting curses off. Now all Harry could think about was how much he wanted that armor. All right, running. He pushed his legs as hard as he could and ran like he was being chased by Dudley's gang. Their laser blasts chased him as he went, but missed by a country mile. For all he knew, their aim was impeccable, but even a master marksman has trouble shooting what they can't see. He ducked beneath a toppled roof and charged through a maze of ruined homes. The trashed buildings made ladders out of railings, slides out of walls, and bridges out of staircases. He came to crouch in an open-air basement and hid behind a pile of furniture and a large novelty UFO replica with kite shields for wings. Homino Revelio. Harry whispered and gave a sigh of relief when the spell came back negative. He'd lost them. That or they just didn't care enough to chase his scrawny arse through the tight rubble. They were both rather broad and muscular. So like a small prey animal fleeing much larger predators, he took the run-and-hide option, and it paid off. Phew! He sighed in relief before removing his cloak. Running for his life had always brought Harry a kind of rush. He didn't care if it be dragons, acromantula, or laser-wielding aliens. It made him feel alive, but always brought a nerve-rending crash afterwards. With that last spell, he hoped anybody in the ministry tracking him would be able to find his position. He couldn't risk trying to sneak back to the cross streets he had sent Hedwig from, but hopefully, whoever got his message had the brains to follow her back to him on a broom. She could always find him. Speak of the devil. Hedwig, he called out when he saw the white puff of feathers pass overhead. She dive-bombed towards him at his call and landed on his chest like a cannonball. He held her tight in a two-armed hug as she rubbed her head against his abdomen. Sheesh, she hadn't left his side but 20 minutes ago. He was saved from his familiar's affection by two broom riders swooping in. Their faces were hard to make out behind the bubble head charms they wore, smart, considering the many dangerous vapors and pulverized materials floating in the atmosphere as dust, but the peg-leg and shoulder-high staff of the male gave one of their identities away as they dismounted. Professor Moody, he greeted with a leap. If Hedwig wasn't in his arms, he would have outright flung himself at the grizzled Auror and embraced him. The paranoid bastard probably wouldn't have appreciated that all too much. Professor? Moody growled as he canceled the bubblehead charm. I ain't never been a teacher. Harry's smile turned into a grimace as he remembered the fate this man had suffered for almost an entire year. Then what the hell have we been getting up to? His lithe companion snarled. We've been playing patty cake or something. Harry turned to insult her for disrespecting a man he, reluctantly, came to care for immensely during the week they spent together under Pomfrey's tender mercies. The words caught in his throat when he got a good look at her. She was, wow. Yes, wow succinctly described her. She was wow. If Narcissa Malfoy was younger, dressed in a two-size-too-small tank top and jeans with a heart-shaped birthmark peeking out of her exposed midriff, this is what she'd look like. If you added some bright, neon green hair to the mix. Also, what was up with the terrible Nay accent? Watch her, Harry. Run I you some Barney rubble in this here? Barney rubble? She asked as she examined the Roswell toy from behind him. Harry turned to Moody in hopes of a translation, but his not former teacher shrugged with a grimace. Good, so she was the insane one, not him. This is my protege, Nymphadora Tonks. Moody introduced the crazy woman. She outright hissed at the old man and looked ready to attack him. Don't call me. Whatever she was about to say, Harry's next question defused the situation. Your name is Excalibur? She blinked at him. Moody blinked at him. Huh? Nymphadora asked. Nymphadora, gift of the nymphs. He explained. They weren't catching on. The only nymph I've ever heard of who gave away gifts was the Lady of the Lake, who gave King Arthur. Excalibur, she gasped. Before his very eyes her hair stood up on end as if she had just touched a power line. It absolutely sparkled as it turned gold, and her eyes danced with every color of the rainbow made liquid. He was too dazzled by her smile to properly ponder how she was pulling the effect off. Well, that settles it then, done it? From now on, people get to refer to my bottle as Excalibur. Tonks explained as her hair settled on pink. Harry shared another worried look with Alastair. It was becoming patently obvious why she was assigned to the grizzled old bastard. The woman was too much for any other Auror to even attempt training. How you be knowing so much about name etymology and all that? Excalibur asked him. Oh, that was English. And she was speaking to him. Professor Trelawney let us pick our own topics for divination homework this summer. He explained, I chose the predictive power of names. And now I'm stuck trying to figure out how being a fuzzy creator of clay containers guarantees me an agonizing and imminent death. Excalibur Tonks snickered at the joke, but Moody was a bit out of the loop, having never gotten to know his colleagues during his tenure at Hogwarts. What can you glean from this crotchety bastard's name? She asked, thumbing her superior officer. She leaned against the pile of rubble housing the toy UFO as she asked. The persecutor, with a foul mood? Harry recited, having already deciphered the names of every person he knew. A bit too on the nose there, no offense, sir. Moody took Harry's jab at the state of his nose in stride by flicking it with his thumb in a rather rude gesture. He seemed ready to retort, probably to defend his name as having the same meaning as Alexander. But before the banter could continue, the room gave a violent jerk. For a split second, Harry worried that an entire two-story building, okay, half of a two-story building, was about to come crashing down on their heads. That was until he saw the red, laser-sharp eyes of the alien robot he'd mistaken for a toy replica. The one Excalibur was currently leaning against. Well, that explained the hole in the ceiling. And the ceiling above that. And the ceiling above that one. Move, Nymphadora! Alastair yelled at the recruit. while she was preoccupied flinching away from the rapidly rising kite shield of a robot elaster, made busy summoning their brooms. He tossed Tonks to her before mounting his own. Harry jumped on behind him. "You had the choice between me and the girl, and you chose to ride bitch with me?" He yelled back as they lifted off. "She scares me. Now put some acceleration into it." Harry yelled back. The Auror obliged, his apprentice hot on his tail, and the robot even hotter on hers. The metalloid demon screeched like a banshee as it shot after them through the holes it no doubt made in the building when it landed. The sound was made all the louder by the cramped quarters. They breached the roof just as it got the bright idea to shoot at them, and the barrage of red plasma bolts blew scorching holes in what remained of the shingles. The crimson bolts provided the only light with which to navigate, save for the equally demonic and equally red bolts of lightning crisscrossing the obsidian clouds above. To headquarters, Moody yelled over the constant stream of plasma bolts littering the side of the building, whose alley they flew into. His words must have registered to the Nay girl because she pulled up beside them and made an affirmative motion with her hand. Harry was a bit too busy worrying about this thing's astronomically high rate of fire and how poorly that boded for them. Then it decided to fire a missile at them. Now make that 2 missiles. Bright blue and glowing they may have been, but they were missiles all the same. A bit of mental math comparing their speed to that of the projectiles in the cramped quarters of the alleyway, and the prognosis wasn't promising. So, Harry did what always worked. Bombarda! The wall directly ahead to his right opened up like a blooming, dusty flower. Lacking the time necessary to let Moody in on his plan, Harry reached around Older Man, grasped the shaft firmly with both hands, and yanked it, guiding him into the hole. If Harry survived to tell about it, he would sure to describe these events in a significantly less homoerotic manner. Thankfully, Tonks was bright enough to come to the same solution as he had, unless he was imagining her voice screaming a blasting curse over the sound of the missile following him and Moody through the hole. Wait, it just changed course like a bludger to follow them. Which means, it's tracking us, Harry yelled to the pilot. He then remembered why he was called Mad Eye and realized he probably already gathered that for himself and would want him to do something useful about it instead of giving a play-by-play. "I gathered that for myself. Thanks. Now make yourself useful while I'm preoccupied instead of giving me a play-by-play," Moody ordered. "Yup. Good OL, predictable Moody." Harry swept his wand in a wide arc above them. He didn't bother uttering an incantation. This wasn't a spell. It had no finesse, just raw, destructive magic pouring out of his wand. The old apartment building was fucked anyways. What was another collapsed ceiling? Timber, drywall, and wiring rained down behind them. But to Harry's horror, the smoky missile pushed right through it all, creating a singed, splintered holes through all it touched. Harry deduced that it wouldn't explode except something more substantial than fist-sized rubble and debris. Before Harry could try a more magical means of stopping the missile, their hallway came to an end, and they crashed through a window. Moody did an impressive barrel roll to transfer some of their momentum into a turn that just barely saved them from slamming into an adjacent apartment building. The black, thunderous clouds above had mercifully parted enough to allow a few rays of sunlight to light their way. Once again, they were going full speed towards whatever destination Moody had in mind, and once again the missile locked onto them and followed their trajectory perfectly. It was then that the alien robot jet rejoined the fray and rained crimson death from above. The plasma bolts threw up charred cobblestone and dirt as they tore up the ground all about them. Harry did his best to focus on the missile closing in on them, but his blasting curses refused to meet their target. At this rate, his only option would be to wait until it was close enough to hit them and cast a Protego, a strategy Harry did not want to put all of his hopes into. Shit. Stupefy. Reductor. Flipendo. Harry tried some larger spells than the pinpoint area of effect that the Bombarder requires. Miss, too weak and just bounces right off. But small blessings. The UFO with kite shield stopped firing at them and veered off. And then Harry heard the reason for the robot's lost interest in them. It was loud, it was high-pitched, and it was coming right for them. Moreover, whatever it might be was taking the full brunt of the robot's attention. His time was out. The missile was a mere meter away from them. All he could do now was pray that this last measure worked and hope it didn't blow them out of the sky. Protego! He yelled. The earth-shattering kaboom would make Marvin the Martian proud. And for all Harry knew, the Looney Tunes character may very well exist. Recent revelations made it a distinct possibility. For a moment, Harry felt weightless, consumed by the dust cloud that obscured what little light still pierced the hellish storm clouds above the city. The next moment had Harry dangling from the back of Moody's broom with one hand, hanging on for dear life. Moody wasn't given the opportunity to slow down and pull him up. However, as the flying kite shields came crashing down in a fiery mass of twisted metal just ahead of them, forcing Alastair to swerve and avoid it. Crescending over a half-collapsed office building was a sight that would sear into Harry's memory for the rest of his life due to the unadulterated fuck-awesome of it. One of the armored aliens from earlier had shot down the robot from the back of a motorcycle. A flying motorcycle. A sleek, weapon-bedecked killing machine of a flying motorcycle. Its blue and silver finishing made the boxy exterior class horribly with the red and black of the rider's armor. Belitter class swoop. Could these guys get any cooler? With their mutual enemy destroyed, cast, or at least Harry thought it was the woman alien, opened fire on them. The front of her hoverbike had a similar rate of fire to that of the UFO from earlier. And just like before, Moody swerved and dodged with a skill that betrayed his years of being the Hufflepuff beater. Still, Harry imagined this would all be going much more smoothly if he was driving and the experienced soldier was manning the figurative guns. In the meantime, Harry did his best to twist his body to reduce air drag and prevent his dangling feet from meeting the ground as he returned fire. In an unusual display of skill, his stunner, knockback, jinx, and reductor all hit the woman on her chest. Like with his earlier blasting curse, they did jack with a side of shit against that godlike armor aside of nearly knocking her off of her hoverbike and ruining the paint on it. The moment of respite they got from her slowing to a near halt to avoid a shattered marble monument of some kind was welcome, but when she regained control of her vehicle, her improved. Her next bolt singed Moody's cloak, and Harry came to a decision. A stupid, reckless, liable to get him killed decision. But it was do or die. Fuck it. That bike is mine, he declared. And with that declaration, he let go and flew, feet first, into Cass's face. That bit of blunt force trauma finally did the trick and knocked her off of the bike. Harry barely managed to grab hold of the hoverbike before joining her in the short trip to the ground. The vehicle bucked at the sudden changes in weight, and its backside dug a deep trench into the ground as he fumbled with the handle. Good news! The denizens of other worlds saw fit to equip their bikes with a throttle on the right handle, just as Earthlings did. Bad news. Harry couldn't drive. Worse news. Cass decided to answer his question on her potential coolness in the affirmative as Harry saw her rise up from behind him like an avenging angel and flew at him by way of an honest-to-God jetpack. She was awfully fast with it, too. She gained on him rather quickly. Impressive grip on that woman, as it completely cut off his airway when she grabbed him by the throat and threw him aside like a rag doll while she remounted the bike. Now, one maneuver every Quidditch player learns early on is called skipping. When you fall off of a broom at high speeds, you don't immediately crash on the ground, unless you're in the middle of a dive, in which case you do just go splat. If you're close to the ground when you fall, then the momentum keeps carrying you forward, and for a few split seconds you can skip across the ground like a rock on water and later roll until still. On a Quidditch pitch, with soft, sleek grass, you can then slide relatively comfortably to a stop. In a desolate post-apocalyptic city with nothing but metal and glass, covered asphalt, and large piles of debris to crash into, sliding to safety wasn't an option. He had two choices. He could use what little time he had left skipping to cast a cushioning charm and be mowed down by Cast. Or he could light that bitch on fire and learn to cope with his shattered body. Incendio Maxima, he yelled. Bombarda Maxima, another voice yelled. A flash of neon green, a sudden jerk, and Harry was being dragged by his arm along the ground. He internally thanked Tonks while Cass caught fire and fell off of her vehicle, which itself caught a nasty case of the explosions just as she started to hit the ground. He maneuvered his feet to skid along the asphalt while Tonks struggled to lift him one-armed. With a mighty heave, he pushed off of the ground and caught onto the broom behind her. A few seconds of fumbling later, and he was pressed comfortably against her back. "Hold on tight," she ordered over the howling wind. "Yeah, that's not going to be a problem. Not with a bare midriff that delightful to hold with both arms." He turned around from the soft woman. He was wrapped around to look at the hard woman who was hopefully wrapped around a tree, only to see her scrambling in the distance and trying to put out the fire he'd enveloped her in. Goddamn, these guys are tough. And loyal, if her partner coming to a stop to assist her was any indication. One turn later, and their flight from hell was over. Harry relaxed into the Lady Auror as the danger faded from his mind and adrenaline faded from his veins. Everything hurt, down to the last microbe in his gut. But not her. She was soft and warm and smelled of peaches. There was no pain where he was touching her. Was this normal? Their flight, sadly, ended a few short minutes later as they pulled onto a street called Grim Old Place. During the interim, it had started to rain. It was a stinking, ashy rain that stung every bit of skin it touched. It wasn't long before it soaked through Dudley's hand-me-downs, and everything hurt twice over. They dismounted and approached a tiny alley between number 10 and number 14. Tonks had to help keep him steady, but he wasn't going to complain about his arm being around her neck while hers were wrapped around his chest. Wait, what? Harry felt the oddest sensation glancing between the two buildings. Every time he read the addresses, he felt like he was forgetting. Something, like a piece of information, repeatedly slipped from his mind. Wasn't there supposed to be an even number between 10 and 14? 11, 13, and 15 were on the other side clear as day. Here, Moody grunted before shoving a crumpled piece of parchment into his free hand. Harry struggled to unfurl it, but soon read the tidy scrawl within. The headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix may be found at number 12, Grimmauld Place, London. That's right, 12. 12 comes after 11. Why couldn't he remember that a moment ago? Before he could ponder this strange mind magic, Moody vanished the burned of paper with a jab of his wand and walked past him to a shabby door that hadn't been there before. Before his very eyes, brick, mortar, barred windows, and everything else comprising a house inflated from the gap between numbers 11 and 13 Grimmauld Place like a bouncy castle. Now there was some interesting magic. And now, Moody barked. Harry obeyed the peeved-off Auror and ducked into the hideous home just as Hedwig landed on the fencing beside it. What he entered could only be described as thinly controlled chaos. "I need more type O for the next batch of blood replenishers," Ginny screamed over the sea of bubbling cauldrons. And indeed, it was a sea. Dozens of black iron tubs filled the hallway and living room to his right where Ginny had called from. "Here, past the boomslong skin," Sirius hollered back from the opposite end of the living room as he tossed a vial of blood to the youngest Weasley. "Burn salves and blood clotus are ready for bottling. Ronald, get to it." The Weasley matriarch ordered her son from a large drawing room to the left of the hallway. Peering inside, Harry had to increase his estimate to hundreds. Hundreds of cauldrons littered every inch of available space save for small deer trails carved out for walking and transporting. This Grimmauld Place was a potion sweatshop. "Coming, Mom." Ron's voice came from a flight of stairs, and down he came, carrying a large box filled with empty vials. "Hey, Harry." Everyone within earshot glanced up at the nonchalant greeting and looked like they honestly wanted to run over and fuss over him. Thankfully, the tasks at hand were more important than their histrionics, and they kept at it. "Potter, Nymphadora," Harry groaned. Out of the door leading to what looked like the kitchen strode Severus Snape. "Are either of you injured enough to need immediate medical attention?" he asked smoothly. Harry blinked at the question. He'd never heard the potion's master show any kind of concern for another person, least of all him. He could only shake his head dumbly at the change of disposition. Perhaps great tragedies like this can warm even the coldest hearts? Good. I trust even dunderheads like you can pull off a satisfactory Wiggenweld potion. You will find all of the ingredients and enough cauldrons to work with in the library upstairs, Snape demanded before unceremoniously shoving 2 cauldrons into their chests. "Now get to it." Author's notes. So, I recently read a Pottermore article titled "The Chapter That Made Us Fall in Love with Nymphadora Tonks." According to the writer, Tonks is supposed to have a Nay accent. I never would have known. Aside from saying Watcher, it never really came out. Naturally, I decided to do some research on the dialect and exaggerated her speaking. The result was oddly Y and oddly stupid. I like Nay Tonks. She's here to stay. And if you want to complain that it's not canon compliant, my excuse is that my story takes place 3 or so weeks before the start of Order of the Phoenix. So my reasoning is that training under Moody beat it out of her, but since she just started under him, it's still there and strong. End of discussion. Want your story written? I take commissions now. You can pay me to write your fanfiction or original works. My prices are as follows. $25 per 1,000 words of fanfiction, with some wiggle room. I don't pad my work. You also get to video chat with me as I type the first chapter. $25 per 500 words for original works, so anything that is not fanfiction. I also charge $25 per 500 words for smut or fetish materials. Price is subject to change in the future. Check with me. Become a patron. NonsensicalRants. You can also still become a patron for $1 to get access to future chapters 2 weeks early and vote on which stories I update next. Cook-Off. Chapter 4. Cook-Off. The next morning saw Harry waking up in a full body ache. He would have suspected a terrible flu, save for the absence of chills, eyeball pain, and fever. Raising his head, he surveyed the room and found it to be unchanged from the night before. Burnt cauldrons littered every inch of the floor, their contents bottled by whoever checked in on them and thought it best to let them sleep. There, on the other side of the room, was Excalibur. She looked different when she was sleeping, with a more normal mouse-a brown color to her much longer hair, which reached down to her shoulder blades. She also had a lot of freckles, and not just covering her face. Maybe she used her abilities to hide those instead of using makeup? He made a mental note to ask somebody if metamorphs are incapable of keeping transformations while sleeping, because he suspected this was what Tonks actually looked like without using any of her shape-shifting abilities. The position, she was sleeping and couldn't be comfortable, though, as she was completely wrapped around a cauldron with her face resting on the rim. So was Harry, now that he noticed his own choice in sleeping position. No wonder he was in so much pain. Deciding to try and spare her some of that same pain, Harry fetched the throw pillows off of the chairs around him and laid them out next to her before gently prying the young woman from her work and lowering her onto them. With that good deed out of the way, he left the room to see if there was some food waiting downstairs for him. With Molly Weasley in the house, there was a good chance for it. It's unthinkable. How could you even try to profiteer after this disaster? Mrs. Weasley was fighting somebody. This didn't bode well for his prospective meal. Because I'm taking all of the risks in transporting this junk, so I get paid, and Albus already promised me a 30% cut. An unfamiliar voice countered. Harry peered down to see the Weasley matriarch arguing with a short, pudgy, and raggedly dressed man whose appearance just screamed crook. He wasn't one to judge someone on first appearances, especially with his hand-me-down clothes. But this man didn't look like the sort of law-abiding citizens would associate with. But it's barbaric. How can you take advantage of people in need? Oh, Ginny's there too. Let's see this man try to battle 2 red-headed women at once then. Actually, he's not taking advantage. Smugglers and price gougers like him provide far more relief after disasters than any other relief efforts. That one was Hermione, and if it had been anybody else, Harry would have scoffed at the claim and made his presence known. But for now, he chose to listen. When price controls or restrictions are applied to markets after a disaster, or any time really, it causes instant shortages. Partly because people will hoard supplies, making it impossible for the vast majority of people to get any at all. Worse, with the prices kept low, sellers and transporters have no incentive to take the financial or safety risk of procuring more of the life-saving supplies, and producers have no way of knowing there's a need without the market signal of higher prices and won't manufacture anywhere near enough. There was the telltale silence that followed every Granger speech in which Harry knew everyone else in the room was staring at her. Slightly oversimplified, but ostensibly correct, Miss Granger. I take it you have read the works of Milton Friedman? Came Snape's cool voice. Actually, I'm a much bigger fan of Thomas Sowell, Professor. Answered Hermione. Time to make his presence known then. He descended the final flight of stairs, walked past the mysterious criminal and his pallet of sweatshop potions, and entered the dining room, where everyone else sat around the table. "Morning, everybody," he greeted while stifling a yawn. All eyes immediately turned on him. "Oh hey, Sirius is here too. Let the fussing begin. Harry dear, we were so worried. Good thinking sending us the street signs, son. It was a nightmare trying to find you blind." Hedwig was in a right state when she arrived. We had everyone out searching. I was even allowed to help, putting my skills as a tracking dog to good use. Harry was so swept up in the Molly/Sirius sandwich, which was tight, sweaty, and oh so loving, that he almost missed Snape trying to sneak out of the kitchen and towards the front door. A thought occurred to Harry, a thought that would have seemed utterly insane to him just a couple days before. Maybe it was his newfound sense of perspective, but Severus Snape had just pulled an all-nighter, spending an entire day of his finite life with people Harry knew he didn't like very much to help save lives. With his prodigious potion skills, that deserved an olive branch, didn't it? "Wait, Professor," Harry called after the potion's master. Snape whirled around in that overly dramatic way he is wont to do and stared Harry down. "Whoa, retract the clause there, Professor. I come in peace. I'm pretty sure we're about to have a big family breakfast. Won't you stay and eat with us?" Harry asked. The reactions were instantaneous. Sirius scowled at him. Molly and Hermione gave him an appraising look, and every Weasley below the age of majority, and two above it, outright hissed at him, which with his ability to understand Parseltongue actually translated to utter gibberish. "What?" Harry said defensively before voicing his thoughts. He just pulled an all-nighter to help respond to a worldwide crisis while working with people he can't stand, I might add. That deserves a little consideration, don't it? Sirius opened and closed his mouth several times as if he wanted to argue a point, but eventually sighed in apparent defeat. "Harry is right. Severus," Sirius said, looking Snape directly in the eye. "You are more than welcome to break bread with us all in my home, whenever you wish to do so." This was Sirius' house? Wow. It really wasn't Harry's place to invite a guest over, was it? Then again, being his godson and all meant it was kind of his house too. Cool godfathers let their godsons invite dinner guests, right? "I appreciate that, Sirius. Really I do," Snape said, looking to all the world genuinely touched by the offer. "But I must refuse. I have a meal ready to cook at home that has already been marinating too long." Harry couldn't tell if it was an honest refusal or an excuse he made up on the fly. It sounded an awful lot like an excuse he made on the fly. "Oh, come on, Professor," Harry pleaded. "Just make it into a stew for dinner and bring it over for a potluck or something. Mrs. Weasley is an excellent cook, and I'm sure she can whip something up to complement it." "That may be true, Mr. Potter, but I am a better cook." Dead silence met Snape's claim. Harry turned to the Weasley matriarch to see she had outright flinched away from Snape with an expression that could be best summed up as "excuse me." Harry had no doubt that the hand she held to her chest was in response to the literal heart attack she just suffered. "I'm not one to brag about such things, but I am a 5-star chef," Snape bragged shamelessly. "It is required as part of a potion's mastery to attend a premier Muggle university for culinary arts, and I graduated top of my class from Le Cordon Bleu in the heart of Paris." Harry very much wanted to call bullshit on that claim, but Snape continued on his rant before he could. As a matter of fact, Molly had begun a potions apprenticeship herself, but dropped out to have William, if I'm not mistaken. Mrs. Weasley confirmed this claim with a nod. "That is true, but I have spent the last 23 years cooking 3 square meals a day for my brood. And I would argue that experience through application trumps education alone." "What? Do you think I've allowed my own skills to stagnate in the decade and a half since I attained my master's? I cook 3 squares a day for myself, without exception, and I strive for quality." Sirius chose that moment to chime in. "It sounds to me like we need to settle this dispute the good old-fashioned way." His godfather said, "It's time for a cook-off." Sirius, the younger Weasleys all descended into uproarious cheers and words of encouragement. Even Harry fell into the festivities and tried to egg the two cooks on. Now, there's no need for that. Severus has already declined the invitation we can wait for." Molly Weasley broke out of her deflection at the sight of Professor Snape rolling up his sleeves and marching towards the stove. "Ooh, went the peanut gallery as Mrs. Weasley repeated her earlier look of offended whiplash. Seeing as it was morning, both the potion's master and Weasley matriarch tore into the supply of eggs with a ravenous fervor. Mrs. Weasley seemed to be going for omelets based on the preparation of chives, bell peppers, cilantro, and cheese, which she chopped with charmed knives while manually beating the eggs with a whisk. Harry couldn't tell what Snape was doing, but it involved a strainer, a boiling pot of water, and a bowl of apple cider vinegar mixed with ale. Fred and George excused themselves to go get a camera, just as the two competitors started on their side dishes. As soon as they were out of sight, Harry pulled Sirius aside. "How in the hell did you goad Snape into this so easily?" Harry whispered into his godfather's ear. "You spend 7 years sharing a quarter of your classes with a man, and you learn the right way to press his buttons." Sirius said wryly. "Teach me," Harry demanded. "What happened to burying the hatchet?" Sirius asked. "To hell with the hatchet. I want to screw with Snape at school," Harry said. "That's my boy," Sirius whispered with a firm hand on his godson's shoulder. While they conspired in the corner, the two cooks continued in their competition. Mrs. Weasley went with the classics, bacon and sausage patties. The smell of frying eggs and pork filled the room as the smoke and steam wafted from the stovetop to the kitchen table, where Ron was already setting the table. Professor Snape went with skillet-fried steak and sliced pears, which he cooked in a separate pot on a low heat, dashing flour, confectionery sugar, and crushed cloves, stirring and crushing it until it became a pudding. With their meals finished, both Mrs. Weasley and Professor Snape served up a plate for everyone, with Snape adding a few last-minute touches, namely freshly ground pepper, some chives of his own, and a spoonful of the vinegar/ale mixture he'd cooled the eggs in. There was no denying it. Snape's food definitely looked better, with the perfectly oval poached eggs perched atop medium-rare steak and sweet pear and clove pudding on the side. What Mrs. Weasley's meal lacked in beauty, it more than made up for with its massive proportions. The difference in their cooking abilities was clear. Molly Weasley cooked for pure caloric impact. Severus Snape cooked like an artist, with extra focus on health and flavor. One type of food was best eaten like a pig, horking it down, the other slowly and with proper table manners. Each person at the table, along with the spots for 3 missing people, had 2 breakfast plates set on them. Harry wanted to dig right into the potion master's masterpiece, but felt uncomfortable trying the man's food first. This was mostly due to their mutual dislike of each other, and partly because of Harry's fondness for Mrs. Weasley. Sirius had no such qualm and split his egg with a fork, lathering his steak in the liquid yolks. "Boys, Nymphadora, breakfast is ready," Mrs. Weasley called out through the kitchen door. "It's Excalibur," Harry corrected without thinking. "What's Excalibur, dearie?" Mrs. Weasley asked him. "Her new name. She likes it," Harry explained. "I coin it. I'm sure she'll legally change it at the first opportunity." Snape made a face like he wanted to confront that statement, but seemed to think better of it. He probably decided it was best to maintain the tentative peace they'd just created. Fred and George arrived long before Tonks, but there was a decidedly awkward, nervous pep to their step. They paused at the kitchen doorway, glancing at each other and everyone in the room. "So, we are about to ask you all an odd question," Fred preemptively warned them. "And while it's going to sound bizarre, like a joke coming from us, we need you to know that we're serious," continued George, deadly serious. "So if you could answer with complete seriosity, just get out with it, you dolts." Snape erupted at them exactly 2 seconds before Harry was planning to. The twins shared one last glance, cleared their throats, and with perfectly serious expressions asked their question. "Have any of you been making deals with the devil?" Dead silence met their question. "What? Huh? Come again?" And so went the line of questions. "You know, the devil," explained Fred. "Lucifer," clarified George. "The morning star?" Fred further elaborated. "Prince of darkness," George spelled out. "Lord of the flies," added Fred. "Oh no, that's Beelzebub you're thinking of, completely different bloke," corrected George. "Stop," Sirius ordered, interrupted their tirade. "No, there has not been any communing with demons under this roof. If there was, I would know." Well, that just raised all kinds of questions for Harry. First, demons are real? Second, Sirius can detect if one has been contacted in his home? that wasn't even considering the possibility of Satan, in particular, being an active threat to humanity. Because he's here, Fred told them. Who's here, dears? Molly asked, as if she hadn't quite understood the perfectly clear statement. Fred and George shared one last concerned glance before turning back to their mother and answering in unison. The devil. They all stared at the twins with blank expressions for a few moments. Then, as if it was choreographed, they all stood up from their chairs in perfect unison, marched through the kitchen door, down the entranceway, and filed into the living and display rooms on either side of the front door. They all pressed themselves against the grimy windows, trying to squint through the muck and see if they did indeed have a supernatural visitor. Standing on the sidewalk across the street was, well, it looked an awful lot like the devil. He had a few more horns than Harry expected from the fallen archangel, which added to his intimidation factor. Even from this distance, Harry could see the black-clad figure had unnatural red and yellow eyes, as if displaying the lake of fire itself. Harry had seen some terrifying things in his days, and this guy certainly ranked. But he was doing something that put him a notch even above witnessing Voldemort rise out of a cauldron in that graveyard. He was staring directly at number 12 Grimmauld Place, as if the Fidelius charm wasn't even there. Want your story written? I take commissions now. You can pay me to write your fanfiction or original works. My prices are as follows. $25 per 1,000 words of fanfiction, with some wiggle room. I don't pad my work. You also get to video chat with me as I type the first chapter. $25 per 500 words for original works, so anything that is not fanfiction. I also charge $25 per 500 words for smut or fetish materials. Price is subject to change in the future. Check with me. Become a patron. NonsensicalRants. You can also still become a patron for $1 to get access to future chapters 2 weeks early and vote on which stories I update next. Such Strange Magics. Chapter 5. Such Strange Magics. Darth Maul stood on the sidewalk, gazing towards the unnatural phenomena across the derelict and desiccated street. If only the savage, undeveloped creatures of this world had the ingenuity to invent and utilize Duracrete and Durasteel, their city might not be such a flaming wreckage, and their sky might not be filled with the aerosolized chemicals of every manufactured construction material, product, or corpse. But that didn't matter right now. What mattered to the cyborg was the overwhelming typhoon of distortion and disorientation made manifest between those two houses across from him. Since his arrival on this strange world, he had tried to reach out to the Force. Each attempt had met with failure. Failure was a deeply loathed and avoided stranger to the greatest warrior Dathomir had ever produced, but he'd finally become acquainted with her these last couple days. He could still feel the Force within himself, so whatever hyperspace anomaly had sent his ship and the meteoric battle station to this backwater planet hadn't cut him off from it. Thank Mother Talzin's small miracles. But all the same, he couldn't tap into the well of power around him to try and determine if the Separatist and Republic ships, and more importantly their Sith and Jedi occupants, had been transported here as well. He would have to find other means to determine if the other Force users were present in this small world, just as soon as he figured out what this strange anti-Force he felt was coming from. Imagine his surprise when, while patiently meditating to pass the time while the droids finished their repairs, he sensed an unnatural facsimile to the Force just outside of his ship. It was brief, but felt like a twisted, infectious mirror image of what a fellow Force user would feel like. Everything about it was wrong. Whereas the Force was all-encompassing, boisterous, and freely giving in what could almost be called a loving embrace, this anti-Force felt small, infectious, and full of guile. It wasn't dark. Even the dark side felt wholly conspicuous. Every drop of its endless abyss screamed, "Here I am. Take me." But this power felt like it wanted to be kept secret, like a hideous thing you would find under a rock, hissing at you and the light you dared to shine on it. Except such creatures existed in nature and were right with the world. This power was not right with the world. He felt a multitude of waves of this power as his servants chased down its user. He watched the footage afterwards and was left with even more questions. Questions that left his search for General Grievous, Count Dooku, and whoever else may have survived the cataclysm for later. He perused the holes in reality that he could still feel even a day after that peculiar sorcerer had cast his bizarre spells, and the trail lead him here. In front of this maelstrom of such strange magics, he still couldn't read the letterings on the sides of the buildings, so he lit up his calm. Cast. He called calmly over the airwaves, "What?" Came the wasp-eye response. He let it slide for now. Recovering from third-degree, full-body burns without Bacta made a certain level of impertinence permissible. How far along is the ship's AI in deciphering the language of this world? Oh, it finished in seconds. Turns out the most common language here is common. Saxon's voice explained over the pained hiss of their female companion. Maul assumed he misheard his commander. "I'm sorry, did you say they speak common?" "Yes, sir." "And their written word?" "Also common. Just a different alphabet to represent letters and numbers." That was good news, if somewhat concerning. For an unknown world to speak common as the primary language, that could only mean they'd had some kind of contact with the rest of the galaxy at large. Or perhaps have been conquered or infiltrated by common-speaking persons. That could have something to do with why he didn't feel the Force anymore. Maybe some Force user had drained this world? It was a frightening thought to contemplate a Darth Nihilus imitator, but perhaps it was best not to jump to such a dangerous conclusion until he'd gathered some more evidence. "Send me the translation." And he did. The hologram on his arm now displayed 2 different alphabets for common. Every symbol from the one he knew placed beside those unfamiliar to him. After several minutes of glancing back and forth from the hologram to the buildings opposite him, he was able to decipher what they said. 11 and 13 Grimald Place. He glanced behind himself to count the numbers on the other buildings of the street, or at least what remained of them. There were numbers 1 through 11 and 13 through 20, save for the rubble where numbers 4, 5, and 16 used to be. Then where is number 12? ARGH. Before he could name the missing place, he felt it again. That twisted imitation of the Force. Only this time, he felt it eye in his head. He knew what it was doing there. It was scrubbing his knowledge of the number 12 out of his mind, putting up a barrier between the cognitive pathways that would connect the words number 12 and Grimald Place. And his was advanced, but familiar mind manipulation his master used on people who were at risk of recognizing the connection between Senator Palpatine and Darth Sidious. It was easier and gentler to create such mental barriers in place of removing memories whole cloth, or simply killing anyone too smart for their own good. But this mind magic, this anti-force bearing down on his mind was anything but gentle. It felt like someone had taken a metal brush meant for cleaning the residue out of blaster chambers and used it to perform brain surgery on him. Very precise brain surgery. Needless to say, it was a hideous sensation, but it explained what he was feeling. There was a home, a building here, that he could not see or even contemplate due to some sorcery trying to hide it from existence and from the minds of all people capable of imagining it. It was magic more powerful than any the Force could do, if only powerful in a very specific way. And if it just attacked him, he let the rage fester. His hatred at the boy he had seen on the playback after their chase. The little human that had nearly killed one of his best soldiers, and one of only 2 he was in contact with. The anger at their lack of Bacta. The confusion at his inability to sense the Force. Most of all, he let his lust for retaliation at this mental assault fester, along with the rest of these beautiful things. He let it metastasize. He let it build up within him, and with it came power. The Force within him sang with the fuel he fed it, a song that turned sorrowful when no force from outside of his body sang back to it. And it was then he did something he'd seldom done in the past. He used a power he neglected to develop due to his own philosophy of combat. Due to his own desire to focus on martial prowess and his need to conquer foes by pure combative skill and might. He flung his hands forward, and from each fingertip came bolts of hyperspace, Lu lightning. It scorched his fingertips, charring his nails as a testament to his wrath, a wrath he unleashed at the hidden place between numbers 11 and 13 Grimald Place, where it too vanished. It was as if his Force lightning was being sucked into a spatial anomaly of some kind, which he reasoned is exactly what was happening, only he couldn't see said spatial anomaly. It mattered little. He leaned into the pool of dark side energy within his very bones, and pressed on. The burning of his fingertips serving as a minor pain to add more fuel to his passions. He carried on for 18 whole seconds, a monumental feat for one so untrained with the skill as him, before releasing his grip on the feral energies that would love nothing more than to turn back on his person. He took a deep, steadying breath and allowed the typhoon of emotions within him to calm down. There would be time to let loose later, but the situation still called for calmness. He doubted his display had killed anybody, let alone destroyed whatever was behind this altered space in front of him. But that hadn't been his goal. He'd given his warning, his shot across the bow, as it were. If the young sorcerer who had humiliated his warriors failed to receive it, well, then Darth Maul would be able to sate his desire for martial conquest soon enough. He mounted his speeder and kicked off the ground. Its systems roared to life, and he fled from the scene of his attack. He had reconnaissance to do, supplies to steal, several thousand missing soldiers in need of rallying, and a whole lot of people in need of killing. If only there were more hours in a day. Harry and his entourage slowly picked their sorry arses off the ground with no small amount of groaning, not to mention a few hisses of pain from those who sliced themselves open on all of the scorched, shattered glass now littering the floor. That lightning, that power that set every instinct in his body on edge, like nails on a chalkboard before he'd even felt its kiss, had been the closest thing he'd ever felt to the Cruciatus Curse. Save for the Cruciatus Curse itself, obviously. But that particular unforgivable didn't shatter windows, set furniture on fire, or melt flesh. Ow, wow. Ginny moaned as she tentatively touched some of the blackened skin on her bare arms, shoulders, legs, and thighs. It only now registered to Harry how short of a cut that summer dress had. But he was in too much pain himself to get worked up over the flash of black lace he spotted beneath said skirt. What in the bloody hell was that? Ron voiced the question on all of their minds. An alien, I would wager. Snape sniped unhelpfully. An alien wizard, per ow wow. Harry tried to joke before succumbed to another spasm coursing through his new scars. Fortunately, Mrs. Weasley had sense to know exactly what would cure them all, though. Let's all head back to breakfast, away from the windows, while I have Creature fetch us some burned salve, The words and wait for Dumbledore were left unsaid. The group of 5 redheads and 3 brunettes shuffled like injured zombies back to the kitchen/dining room, where the fruits of the cooking competition sat on all of their plates. Well, all of their plates except for Harry's. His plate was empty, likely due to the shapely shapeshifter sitting in his chair, chewing on the last remnants of medium-rare steak. "Morning, folks," Excalibur greeted between chews. "The hell a pinito all of yous? You look like you was all left in the oven too long." It was such an appropriate description of their appearance that not even Snape could come up with a retort, settling for, instead, shrugging and taking a seat to enjoy his meal. Harry and the others soon followed. It was all of it absolutely delicious. Having Tonks apply burned salve to his wounds made it all the more relaxing. At least, it was better than having Creature do it, but it would have been better if she'd done it for him exclusively. Watching her do the same for Snape, Ron, and Hermione took away from the intimacy of the gesture. That Fletcher fellow had swung back around to pick up more supplies for selling before Excalibur was finished and helped apply the sweet-smelling cream to the others as well. It was all almost enough to take Harry's mind off of that lightning caster. Almost. What kind of training, what kind of study was required to cast such dark and powerful magic without a wand? Magic fueled by hate and rage so pure that Harry had felt it build up within the demonic figure before he'd even cast the spell. How does one learn to use those emotions? Emotions he was all too familiar with, to fuel such strange magics. Harry was curious. Harry was very, very curious. Somewhere off the coast of England, Albus Dumbledore and Alastor Moody stepped off of the helicopter and onto the American aircraft carrier. The former had to duck beneath the doorway and hold his bowler hat in place to prevent the wind from stealing it away. Alastor tried to tell him something over the whooping sound of the spinning blades, but Albus' hearing wasn't quite what it used to be. No doubt the Cyclops was complaining about the Muggle penguin suits they had to wear in order to blend in. That or the eye patch. A contingent of soldiers waited on them near the portal leading down into the depths of this steel monster of a ship. Introductions were superfluous, as these men were fully trained in dealing with wizarding guests. We fished them out of the water not 20 minutes ago. They didn't resist. The man informed them. Have they said anything of note? Albus asked as they made their way towards the brig. We haven't even attempted to interrogate them. Procedure dictated hazmat suits and containment in case of alien pathogens. Can't risk an unknown plague. Seemed reasonable. They're both holed up in biological containment tents in the brig. Just through here. The officer informed them as they passed through another portal. The quarantine brig looked like something out of those old-timey science fiction horror flicks he and Aberforth used to go see decades earlier. Back when they had good storytelling, but horrible visuals. Thick, clear plastic tubes large enough for an elephant to walk through had been cut up and taped together to form a pair of hermetically sealed rooms. Within each sat a man. The older one was Negroid and appeared to be in his 40s or 50s. The younger was Caucasoid with a short, well-maintained beard. Both appeared perfectly human, and both wore robes over clothes that wouldn't look out of place in a monastery warrior monks. Are you quite sure they are not of this world? Albus asked, allowing his skepticism to drip into his voice. Positive. They emerged from a space-worthy capsule similar to those we designed for Earth reentry. Likely an escape pod. The officer in charge informed him. Also, we confiscated a pair of Hones to god laser swords off of them. They're pretty amazing. Decades of working in an institution teaching dangerous magic to children and teenagers came rushing back to Albus like a freight train. A freight train insisting his informed the grown man that playing with laser swords could be detrimental to the health and safety of himself and those around him. So, which would you like to interrogate first? The blonde Sean Connery or the Samuel Jackson lookalike? One of the other officers offered. Albus recognized the former reference, but not the latter. Perhaps a relative of that pop singer Phileas adored? One of the other officers leaned into the one who had just spoken and whispered just loud enough for Albus to hear. I will give you all of my earthly possessions if you can teach him to say motherfucker to greet people instead of hello. Albus outright flinched at the vulgarity, but was prevented from reprimanding the young man for his speech by the sound of tapping on plastic. Excuse me. The blonde Sean Connery, looking alien, spoke in perfect English. I realize I'm not in an advantageous negotiating position here, but could I convince you to lend us some spare sets of clothes? Or perhaps a towel? We are both rather damp. Albus examined the two, and indeed, their robes were still soaking wet. Had they not been given any accommodations in the 20 minutes since these soldiers fished them out of the sea? I think I would like to speak with the young, well-spoken man first. The supreme mugwump informed the soldiers. Alastair, if you wouldn't mind interrogating his dark-skinned friend. Become a patron. NonsensicalRants. Patrons who pledge $3 get all future chapters a month early and a link to the Discord server. Patrons who pledge $10 get the right to vote on story choices, what story I update next, and access to the source code for my fangame projects, such as Frogger He's Back and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for PS1. Patrons who pledge $25 get access to X-rated scenes and commission works. I take commissions for $25 per 500 words. Charity. Chapter 6. Charity. Their trip to the blood donation center was rain-drenched and reeked of rotten eggs due to the ash and sulfur in said rain. It was made even more uncomfortable by taking place in the overly cramped pedovan that Fletcher managed to procure during the recent chaos and enchant with space expansion those charms. It was still a tight fit. Their 8-person group hug including Ron, Fred, George, Ginny, Hermione, Crookshanks, and a transformed Padfoot. Mundungus was driving and Tonks was riding shotgun, actual shotgun in hand, though it was just for show. Muggle rustlers, Yeggs, and Cracksman taking advantage of this weather won't be scared off by me, Twig, but they damn sure'll flit when they get a glance of me, Bilmistesque. She had said, brandishing a long-barrel shotgun. All Harry understood from that was the word boomstick. Harry was trapped between Hermione and Ginny, and consequently trapped suffocating in the smell of their two warring perfumes, which were both far too strong, along with the cacophony of whatever scented shampoos, soaps, deodorants, and lotions they tortured their bodies with every morning. It was nice to be shielded from. Crookshanks and Padfoot's natural musk by the girl's artificial musk was the only thing about this situation he found himself thankful for. That and the expansion charms Fletcher had placed inside. Honestly, it wouldn't have been so bad if it wasn't for the stacks upon stacks of medicinal potions they'd been stocking over the last couple days. Hell, even Harry had pitched in and earned his first ever. Exceeds expectations on a potion after Snape, in what passed for good humor to the miserable bat, started handing out grades to them all with each potion. There was one noteworthy moment when Fred and George had suggested using salamander oil drained from the skins of salamanders. Don't ask. As an additive for a fever-relieving potion. It should force the drinker to not only sweat out toxins, like the normal potions do, but also drain it out through the oil from their hair follicles. Fred had explained, they'll be grungy, but healthy. George had added, before handing Snape a vial of what looked like habanero sauce mixed with bacon grease. Harry had a niggling suspicion that Fred and George had procured the salamander oil through less than legal means, and possibly with the aid of this mundungus gentleman. Snape had examined the vial for a few moments before placing it down and turning his eyes onto the twins, as if seeing them for the first time. The potion's master stared at them for nearly an entire minute, as if clinically examining them and logging all of his findings in a dark compartment deep inside of that mind of his. "You two have been holding on me, haven't you?" Snape suddenly said. "A what?" "I mean, you two have seldom achieved and exceeds expectations in my class, and yet you are knowledgeable enough about potions. Ingredients to know what affects altering the formula of a potion with what is undeniably a rare and esoteric ingredient." Snape summarized rather succinctly. "You're correct, by the way. That is exactly what adding this will do, and I'm experienced enough to tell you that despite never having tried it, you've been holding back in my class. That or feigning incompetence." Fred and George shared a nervous look that seemed to indicate the latter. If it weren't for that look, Snape might even have believed the tsunami of bullshit that came pouring out of their mouths as they tried to explain away their lucky guess. "I'm only going to say this once, because it makes every molecule in my body want to vomit by doing so." Snape preempted. "The two of you, both of you, have the making of genuine potion prodigies. Based on this alone, I can recognize that, and I will not see your talent go to waste. You two will be dropping care of magical creatures and rejoining minute level class." Their ability to make up excuses for why they wouldn't be able to join him in his exceptionally enjoyable classes were actually pretty reasonable. "But we're in 7th year, and we didn't take your classes in 6th year. We're already in divination and care. Then you'll be dropping one of them, I don't care which, and rejoining the 7th year students. I doubt you will have any difficulty catching up," he had told them, "especially seeing as both of you are dating my top students in your year, who I'm sure will be happy to lend you their old notes. Angelina and Katie were great at potions? Good to know. And cram an entire year's worth of potions material before term starts?" George said doubtfully. "Indeed. I believe that gives you 3 entire weeks to cram. Fortunately for you, I keep multiple spares of my assigned coursework," he had said before picking up his physician's bag. Not for the first time since Harry's arrival, Snape pulled a Mary Poppins, and out of the bag came an entire potions cabinet, triangular in shape with glass doors, and no fewer than 7 shelves. He pulled open the bottom drawer, only for it to extend outwards to a comical length, to the point it was longer than the cabinet was tall. Within this drawer were copies of the books assigned to each year of potion students, in triplicate. He retrieved 2 of the 3 copies of what must have been the assigned books for 6th years, titled Advanced Potions Making, and handed them to the twins. "I suggest you get started," were Snape's final words. "And if I hear so much as a complaint about being railroaded into my class, I might just pay Molly a visit and tell her about your budding talent. If I fail to see you through your potions mastery, she won't." Lo and behold, they had yet to complain. In fact, their noses were in the books even now, though reading in the van couldn't have been easy with Fletcher's driving. Somehow they were both managing, as was Hermione. "The hell do I pay me taxes for if Parliament doesn't do nothing about these air potholes?" Fletcher complained as they drove clear off what little road remained and into what could charitably be called a fissure before climbing back up the other side and onto the road again. They have half a mind to snub the tax collectors this year, see. Harry had to admit. The creepy, smelly smuggler was starting to grow on him. Or at least his sense of humor was. The rest of the ride went similarly, and at one point devolved into an off-roading tour of the ruins of London. Harry didn't know what modifications Fletcher had made to the shocks, axle, and transmission, but they must have been pretty hefty feats of magic to allow this old rust bucket to drive through the completely flattened remains of homes, hotels, restaurants, and more with little difficulty. Hell, the only time they stopped was for him and Tonks to stick their wands out through the window and blast away any rubble, usually fallen telephone lines or uprooted trees, out of the way before continuing their journey. The utter destruction eased up when they hit Romford, and by the time they passed Basildon, it was smooth roads all the way to Roxford. Even though it was almost midday by the time they arrived at their destination, it still felt like night, as the sky had yet to clear up and was still nothing more than billowing waves of black and gray. Fortunately, the rain had stopped, and they had yet to see any crimson lightning streaking across the sky, as was the case a few days ago. So things looked to be improving somewhat. When they were finally let out of the cramped vehicle, Harry had sudden flashbacks of the World Cup just a year before. If the World Cup had been significantly more depressing and more resembled a refugee camp in a war-torn country crossed with Woodstock. There were nearly as many campers, families sleeping in cramped cars, and the occasional RV as there were tents. The abodes of the homeless and displaced stretched on for as far as the eye could estimate. To his left, extending north all the way to the River Crouch, and to his right nestled in the ashes of Southend, and in front of him all the way out to sea. My God! Hermione had gasped. How many people have been displaced? Millions. And more arrive every day. Fletcher answered, and the sadness in his voice actually sounded genuine. This here tent city extends all the way north to Tiptree, most forming small tent and motorhome villages on what used to be crop fields. Used to be, on account of everybody needing to eat now that supply chains have been cut off. Tonks explained in perfect normal English. They're gathering near the bay in the hopes of being first when the next shipment of humanitarian aid comes through from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. They all got hit pretty bad by the impact too, but at least they have some food to spare, if not much. The solemn mood continued as Fletcher and Tonks backed the van into the front flap of a wedding tent and uploaded the cargo, leaving Padfoot and Crookshanks to watch over them. It only took a few minutes for them to finish before motioning for the children to join them. Surprise, surprise, the tent space was expanded. Clean, white beds reminiscent of the Hogwarts hospital wing filled the entire football court-sized space. And upon spotting Madame Pomfrey speaking to Pale Man, Harry realized it was more than just a resemblance. They were the Hogwarts hospital wing beds. Most of the beds were filled with people hooked up to machines via intravenous tubes, but there was a curtained section in the back, which he supposed was for helping people with serious injuries. This was a magical blood donation center and clinic. Pomfrey herself was standing beside a figurative mountain of blood replenishing potions. So that's what this was all about. Farming blood from witches and wizards using potions, and using that blood for muggles for whom potions don't work. Clever. Such a pleasure to see you here to volunteer instead of demanding my resources for a change, Mr. Potter. Pomfrey greeted as they approached her. Good morning, Madame Pomfrey. Is there anything we can do to help? Harry offered stoically. Well, since you're so eager to offer your services, perhaps you can help Mr. Sanguini here transport the blood we already harvested. Madame Pomfrey said, indicating the man beside her. Vampire. Sanguini was a vampire. Sanguini was very obviously a vampire. Surely if he could recognize this, then Madame Pomfrey could as well. By extension, logically speaking, was he trustworthy? One shipment will be delivered to my fellow vampires. We have also been displaced during this crisis and are in need of food like any other. Sanguini spoke as if trying to head off any suspicion. It's all some of us can do to keep our brothers and sisters from resorting to preying on mortal refugees in their time of desperation. It is only thanks to your orders, excuse me, school's diligence and forethought that we've prevented any incidents to date. Sanguine gave them a wink to show he was an ally of the order, but knew to pretend Dumbledore was acting as if his humanitarian aid was being done on behalf of Hogwarts to keep up a front. What an interesting circle of allies Dumbledore was building. And once you're done with that, we need to prepare the shipment of Wolfsbane for the displaced werewolves. Madame Pomfrey pressed on, as if oblivious to their interaction. Miss Granger, while the boys are taking care of that, why not go see your parents? I'm sure you have experience helping them around their clinic. Your parents are here? Ron asked abruptly. Of course. People still need dental work after an alien spaceship crashes into their backyards. Hermione chuckled at her own joke. Ron mumbled something about tooth healers, probably trying to remember what he could about her parents. Can I, meet them? Ron asked with a nervousness that seemed disproportionate to the question being asked. No worming your way out of work. Pomfrey reinserted herself in the conversation. When you're done with that, can jump into one of these beds and donate. What are your blood types? A positive, Hermione said with a grin. So that where her grades come from? I don't know, were Ron and Harry's simultaneous answer. Right? Off with you then. Madame Pomfrey ordered. They scampered to their individual tasks. Harry and Ron joined Sanguini at the stacks of potions. Hermione followed Pomfrey's directions out of the magical tent and presumably to whatever tent her parents had set up shop in, carrying Crookshanks with her. Ginny remained with Madame Pomfrey, donning the same white apron and healer's hat the other volunteers did. Fred and George seemed to have vanished during the kerfuffle, as had Padfoot. So, Ron queried as they removed the plastic wrap from the first pallet. Do you reckon it's too soon to ask her father's permission? Harry paused in his work from confusion at the sheer oddity of the question. Permission? Harry pressed. You know, permission to pursue. Hermione, he whispered the last part with his teeth clenched tight, as if the admission didn't want to leave his mouth. You want to ask him if you can marry her? Harry asked aghast, barely managing to keep things below a whisper. No, of course not. Ron deflected. Well, maybe. Hopefully. If things go really well, but that's a bit far off in it. Is it too soon to ask his permission to court her? Harry tried to mentally conjure a bridge over whatever cultural gap Ron seemed to be trying to leap over with this conversation. In his head, he deciphered court as date, but without the muggle acceptability of premarital and the express purpose of marriage down the line. Apparently, dating in the wizarding world is a family affair? Well, yeah, of course it is. He reasoned if it's meant to lead to marriage, the joining of families, then it is the entire family's business who dates who. And it's most certainly the father's business. When did you set your heart on this one, Ron? Harry sidestepped the issue as he separated the different crates of potions into their own stacks. Honestly, I'm not sure. It probably happened the day she punched Malfoy. Though looking back further, I think the seeds were sown when I saw her petrified in that bed for months. Ron explained wistfully. Back then, I didn't know what possessed me to visit her bedside at every free hour, even though you didn't, or to put flowers in a vase beside her bed, or replace those flowers. But after the ball, I think what my heart was trying to tell me finally got through my skull, and I've been thinking about the right way to do this ever since, you know? Harry could only nod. He didn't exactly know what to say to that, but that was partly because he wanted to defend his identity as Hermione's friend at the suggestion that he hadn't visited her often enough after her run-in with the basilisk. Then he realized Ron had made no such accusation. There was also the fact that he didn't know what the hell Ron was talking about. You were raised by muggles, so I figured you might know how these things are done on the other side of the train better, if you catch my meaning. Ron explained. Sorry, mate, my cousin is a guy, and he's not exactly smooth with the ladies. So I don't really have experience with these kinds of things on either side of the barrier. Harry explained. My aunt and uncle don't exactly share their romantic adventures over dinner either. Thank God for small miracles. Were the Dursleys even still alive? Probably something to look into. Eventually. If you want my opinion, though, I think you should just ask her on a date. Harry decided. And explicitly say it's going to be a date. What? Without her parents' permission? Ron asked. Harry nodded. But that's just so disrespectful. He concluded. He made and raised her. He has the right to approve or disapprove of me before things even start. It's his legacy I'll be marrying into after all. Harry suddenly found himself wishing for Tonks' presence so she could translate what Ron was saying into her usual gibberish, and Fletcher could, in turn, translate that into English. Where were those two anyways? Does she need approval from your parents before you ask her out? Harry tried to reason with him. Well, yeah, obviously. Ron shrugged. What? Harry asked. They approve. They already like her and want her in the family. Ron explained. Well, Harry was definitely out of his depth now. He wondered if he should ask Arthur for a lesson on pure-blood etiquette. At this rate, because clearly he was in need of some and was way behind his peers. What about the old ball? Harry realized. Were we supposed to ask Mr. Patil before taking his daughters to the dance? That was a school ball, not potential wedding and kids. The couple Snape caught in the rose bushes would beg to differ on the latter point. I really don't think I'm the best person to be asking, Ron, Harry said finally with a time of finality. Ron dropped it. It took some workarounds, but I did manage to splice into one of our ship sensors. General Kenobi explained over the holographic map of Earth. And according to the records it kept of the impact, we know that droid dropship remains crashed here, and here. He pointed to several places in the Atlantic Ocean, though the map also showed several smaller places over the European landmass in red, with green spot indicating Mandalorian's forces all over the Sahara and Middle East. Blue dots indicated places their own clone troopers had crash-landed. And you're sure your ship's remains don't pose a biohazard to our world, General? Dumbledore pressed. Positive. We keep our ships clean. Droid forces forego that, as their soldiers can't exactly get sick. General Windu explained. But that doesn't make any sense. Moody grumbled. Metal or flesh, they're soldiers, and shit duty is part and parcel of maintaining discipline in a clean ship, in every sense. Why wouldn't they have their droid soldiers mopping the deck on occasion? If for no other reason than to prevent exactly this. It had been a long 2 days of negotiations and explanations, but learning that there was a republic of alien worlds spanning the galaxy had come as a shock to the system. A shock they had shared with the governing bodies, not only of their own countries, but all leaders in the world, through encrypted messages to keep it all top secret until it was decided on how they would share this information with the public, of course. After that bombshell learning of these Jedi and their order, or more aptly, philosophy came as a much lesser concern. Space wizards were something Albus expected to encounter after learning of space muggles. Seemed like a logical step from them. Dark space wizards, like the 2 that were likely to be planetside now, was just more bad news in the maelstrom of it they found themselves in. Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi had explained the line's draw in the galaxy-spanning war taking place in the heavens at this very moment, and their role in it. They had all decided to refer to them by their military ranking rather than their order ranking. As the U.S. soldiers correctly pointed out, referring to people as master held negative connotations in the current dialect. They had little time to actually sit down and talk, and had spent that time discussing the current crisis and how to go about dealing with it. And yet they had developed a great deal of rapport and trust in one another. But the captain of the ship still refused to return the warriors' lightsabers to them. Dumbledore got the distinct impression they were perfectly capable of escaping or wreaking destruction without them, seeing as he had witnessed a few of their Force abilities. Abilities they shelved discussion on for after they dealt with the current dilemma, and which Dumbledore sincerely doubted only encompassed telekinesis. You are making the assumption that the leaders of the droid forces want to prevent collateral damage by way of accidentally introducing invasive species, pathogens, and waste products into the biospheres of Battlefront worlds. General Windu responded. Dumbledore mentally amended General Windu's explanation to include the horrendous military application of forcing your enemies to expend resources quarantining and disinfecting battlefields in affected areas instead of devoting those resources to the front lines. We have vessels capable of reaching the ocean depths and torpedoes capable of delivering payloads there if need be. The ship's captain, Greaves, interjected. But we don't have any payloads capable of disinfecting hundreds of square miles of ocean floor, save for nukes, which I would prefer to avoid. You have nuclear armaments? General Kenobi interjected. That is very frightening news. Most civilizations don't develop those until a century or 2 after mastering spaceflight, and by then they've developed means of purifying radioactive fallout or have shielding technology that make their destructive potential moot. How have you not wiped yourselves out yet? Barely. Captain Greaves answered in place of being offended by the accusation. It was a fair accusation after all, but we have several thousand tons of disinfectant on board our ships, one of which is crash-landed in one of your capital cities. London. General Windu asked. London. Dumbledore corrected. Well, it looks to have been a rather bad crash, and we had lost contact with the ship before the crash when it was overrun with droid forces. Our best hope is retrieving the disinfectant from the ship in orbit. Here, Kenobi offered as he pressed his fingers onto the hologram. The hologram expanded to include the moon, the array of ruined satellites that had been shut down by the electromagnetic wave created by the space-time anomaly which brought these aliens to Earth's doorstep, and several spaceships. Battleships, Dumbledore amended. The one shaped like an arrowhead is ours. The one shaped like a sphere with a halo around it is a droid command ship. Both appear to be offline. These rocky fragments are what remains of the Mandalorian asteroid base. General Windu explained as he indicated each model in turn. Our goal is to board our own ship and release the disinfectant tanks. The unloading process is automatic, and once released, the tanks will fall quickly into the atmosphere. They are more than capable of surviving re-entry and are buoyant. If we plan it right, they should crash into the ocean near the infections are likely to be, and we need only row out to them and prepare them for use. In a manner of speaking. There's just one problem with that. How are we going to get up there? Alastair correctly poked a hole in their plan. Albus might be able to disapparate that far vertically and with enough accuracy to appirate back inside of the ship, but the velocity of the ship means that the interior walls will reduce him to spaghetti sauce within a nanosecond of his arrival. His assumptions were true in all cases. Appirate? Asked General Windu. Disapparate? Asked General Kenobi. Teleport. Captain Greaves answered simply. This raised their eyebrows. Well, with some modifications our escape pods could escape your atmosphere, but we have neither the tools nor the parts. And entering London to try and salvage either is too dangerous and a fool's errand. Our best bet is to contact a droid already on board the ship and have them do it. General Kenobi explained. Hopefully one or two has survived or regained power and is repairing the ship. It has enough oxygen and supplies to keep our men alive for a week or two without the filter system being active, so hopefully they're fine. Wait, I thought droids were the enemy. One of the officers prodded. Oh, we have droids too. Protocol droids, astromechs, cleaning droids, and other types of droids you would scratch your heads if I told you the names of. General Kenobi explained before tinkering with the device which served as the projected and the communicator. Let me just boost the signal to try and catch any of our droids' frequencies. The device erupted with more of that space static that sounded so eerie to Albus' ears. They remained in silence for several minutes as General Kenobi tuned the device. Oh no! General Kenobi moaned before slouching in his seat and bringing both palms up to his face. What? Prodded Mace. What is it? General Kenobi groaned before bringing the transmitter up to his mouth and speaking. Come due. Become a patron. NonsensicalRants. Patrons who pledge $3 get all future chapters a month early and a link to the Discord server. Patrons who pledge $10 get the right to vote on story choices, what story I update next, and access to the source code for my fan game projects, such as Frogger He's Back and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for PS1. Patrons who pledge $25 get access to X-rated scenes and commission works. I take commissions for $25 per 500 words. Spinning Wheels. Chapter 7. Spinning Wheels. R2. D2 floated through the debris fields of Republic, Separatist, and Mandalorian garbage whilst whistling a merry tune. He'd been out there for an entire week and change, course-correcting his trajectory to avoid burning up in re-entry of this unknown planet and the similarly terrible fate of being shredded by the shrapnel now orbiting it. But now he had caught his bearing and developed a mental map of where everything was. Every ship, vessel, combatant, and projectile. And with this information, he set himself a new mission, without orders from anybody to get in the way of it. He was going to assassinate Count Dooku. Ballsy? Impossible? A death wish to so much as seek conflict with the Master Jedi turned Sith? Hardly. The bastard was stranded in a dead ship somewhere between the rest of the fleet and the lunar body of this backwater planet. His life support was barely active, and once or two managed to reach the vessel, it would be even less functional. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be the most delicious irony? The great Sith Lord, killed by a meager astromech. Oh, he'd be able to rub it into Master Kenobi's face until the end of time. All the way through his natural life, and beyond if he could get hold of the holocron he'd inevitably leave behind. One more correction in his flight path, and he'd be on a collision course with the Good Count's ship. A few crossed wires here, a blown circuit there, and he'd be no more. Come due. Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice came in over his intercom, and there went his chance at immortality, of fame, fortune, and respect. In mere moments, this asshole would issue some kind of order which amounted to busy work, and his protocols would make it impossible for him to refuse. Perhaps he could just ignore the call for the 30 or so hours it would take to reach Dooku. R2, I know you're receiving this. Obi-Wan said over the comm, damn it all. I'm kind of busy at the moment. R2 relayed to the Master Jedi. What could you possibly be busy with? You're floating aimlessly in space, exclaimed Kenobi. I'm mere hours away from landing on Count Dooku's barely functional ship and disabling his life support system, R2-D2 answered. So unless you have something more important than killing the leader of the separatist movement, I humbly request you fuck off. There was a pause in correspondence. One so long, R2-D2 dared to hope that he'd actually had the last word for a change. It was not to be. R2-D2, I'm assigning you a new mission. Change course to reactivate the systems on the 212th Attack Battalion's Venator-class ship, Vigilance. Resuscitate the entire company from stasis and await further orders. Obi-Wan eventually ordered. R2-D2 was silent as he warred with his internal programming. The Jedi Master chose his words carefully, painstakingly listing every minutiae of detail, so as to not allow R2 to deviate and reactivate a different ship out of spite, which he wouldn't do. But Obi-Wan didn't trust him. What was more, his prioritization circuit would place resuscitating thousands of soldiers far above assassinating one enemy. One life equaled one life in the purely logical moral system installed into droids. R2 could spot one loophole in the command, however. There was no time constraint, so he was fully capable of acknowledging the order, advancing on Count Dooku, then moving on to the mission Obi-Wan had given him. Immediately, Mace Windu's voice amended. Roger that. R2-D2 responded. If he had teeth, he'd be grinding them right now. I take it that cacophony of beeping and whistling meant something to you? Dumbledore asked when the space wizards finished their conversation with the robot. Indeed, General Windu said. Astromech speech is limited to a set number of responses. It isn't taxing to learn it, so most people do. Although our little helper has developed an extended vocabulary far beyond the normal ability of an astromech, General Kenobi added. We can't figure out why. Our best guess is due to the extensive amount of contact he's had with Force users. That seems to be the common factor in droids that achieve otherwise unheard of levels of sapience. Fascinating. Machines gaining sentience through proximity to magic? This was quite different to the magic wizards used. Electronics in particular went haywire when powerful spells were used near them, and became useless over time if weaker magic is repeatedly used near it. I am beginning to sincerely regret our lack of time to communicate and discuss our histories and abilities, Dumbledore said to General Windu, the more senior of the two space wizards. And I even further regret that we still do not have such time. Alastair and I must get back to our community and help where we can, seeing as the situation involving the Separatists' lack of hygiene is well underhand here. How might we keep in contact? General Kenobi proffered a communicator from his pocket and Dumbledore took it. He made a mental note not to use any magic around it and to transport it non-magically to a Muggle or Squib cohort, one who could relay communications more easily. I will be getting this to an associate of mine, a Miss Arabella Figg. She will have to work as an intermediary between us, though one not as fast or efficient as either of us would hope, Dumbledore explained. Why not keep the communicator on hand? General Windu asked. Because, Alastair answered for him. Our magic interrupts electronics, especially sensitive ones. It's why we've refrained from using any in here. Alastair waved an arm to indicate the many receivers, transmitters, radar, and other things Dumbledore couldn't identify. Indeed, we have been avoiding the use of any magic on this ship entirely, for our safety as much as yours, Dumbledore explained. Winda pondered their explanation even as they gave it. That is odd. I have never heard of the Force having such effects, except in nexuses of power or when intentionally used by those with electrical inclinations. The dark-skinned pondered aloud. Oh, trust me, Master Jedi, Dumbledore said with the utmost respect. The power you wield and the powers we wield are very different beasts on every level. When we have the time, we simply must compare notes. Windu and Kenobi both seemed unconvinced by his claim, but bowed in farewell all the same. Dumbledore returned the bow as Alastair simply turned to leave. Dumbledore followed his Auror friend on the winding path back to the chopper. An entire week aboard a steel ship, unable to use magic, was stressful even for him, but he didn't let his eagerness to leave show. Harry tried not to let his eagerness to leave show, but his usual grumpiness from over the summer had returned with a vengeance as he helped move pallets of supplies around the medical tents. He wasn't the only one either, as both Ron and Hermione expressed their distaste for the work and lack of action each time they crossed paths. Hermione's parents were too busy to see her, nor to have an awkward conversation with Ron for that matter. As such, when they finally all had a break, they schemed. Big city out there still on fire, Ron said. A lot of people hurt, in need of help, Hermione said. Alien robots and space wizards running amok, said Harry. Though the words out of their mouths were different, their meanings were the same, as were their intentions. Are we stealing the van or hoofing it? Ron asked. The creepy pedophile van, obviously, Hermione answered, before leading the way to where the vehicle had been parked. The boys followed her lead to the ruined grass field where the van and many other vehicles were parked. Harry checked the front, as Ron checked the back, and Hermione checked the surroundings. They were all clear. I'm driving, Ron said as he jumped into the driver's seat. Well, naturally, Hermione scoffed as she took shotgun. Harry squeezed in between the front seats, holding himself up against the sides of them. His heart felt like it was going to burst through his chest as Ron backed the van out of the field. Such was his anticipation of them being caught. But when they peeled off onto the main road back towards London, he breathed a sigh of relief. So, where are we going? Sirius asked. Ron swerved into a ditch. Whether from his own surprise at Sirius' appearance, or from being distracted by Harry and Hermione screaming, the world may never know. R2. D2 reduced his thruster speed and braced for impact with the Republic battleship. The Vigilance was so wholly out of control that it was orbiting the planet while spinning along its horizontal axis like a drill head. This certainly made landing a dangerous task, but he couldn't exactly disobey orders now, could he? The landing was as rough as he expected, and despite landing feet first, the force of the collision still jiggled all of his components to the point that he sputtered out of consciousness for a few seconds. He shook his head, twisted it back and forth in the best approximation of a shake he could manage, and began rolling along the ship's hull. The vessel was surprisingly well intact, lacking the pockmarks of space debris collisions that the remains of the Federation droid command ship on the opposite side of the globe. To say nothing of the Mandalorian meteoric space station. R2, D2 drove across the surface with ease, despite its spiraling motion, until he reached a terminal he could jack into. Whatever combination of radiation and electromagnetic energies they passed through in that warp space anomaly really did a number on the power systems. Only the backup power systems were functioning, and they were being used to power the emergency cryosleep stations for the troops who survived. These were usually reserved for medical purposes, but could be used to simply put soldiers into hibernation when stranded. Good news was the main power supply wasn't destroyed or even harmed. It was just all of the systems that transported power to other systems of the ship. It was a really simple fix, amounting to turning it off then back on again. Or more accurately, unplugging everything then plugging them back in and flipping the trip fuses back on. Bad news was there were literally millions of such switches and connective technology on board the ship, and R2-D2 was just one droid. But he didn't have to be. Checking the power usage of the backup systems, he discovered that barely 3/4 of the emergency power systems were being used for the cryostations. meaning there was plenty to resuscitate the hundreds of droids on board who had been knocked offline by the hyperspace anomaly. R2 had been knocked out by it too, but Anakin had been wise enough to, long ago, fit him out with what he referred to as a defibrillator to send a shock through his system if he were ever shut down through an EMP pulse. And that's what he was about to do to all of the docked droids on board. A few turns of the jack here, a digital signal there, and presto. An electrical surge ripped through the ship, giving every droid on board a nasty wake-up call, and the mechanical equivalent of a hangover to go with it. If he didn't have such a slave driver of his own, R2 probably would have given them a few minutes to orient themselves. "All right, boys," he mentally hollered at the few hundred delirious astromechs. "We got 12 million or so cables, switches, fuses, and dials to do the old in and out on. And that's only the beginning of bad news I have for you. Hop to it. No dilly-dallying. Up, up, up." And so, through his connection to what remained of the ship's systems, he felt his many brethren stir awake and cuss at him in their varied little ways. Situations like these always helped him to expand his vocabulary. Today especially was a gold mine of vernacularistic discovery. After chewing Ron out for failing to discover Sirius in the back, they chewed him out again for totaling the van. It was, of course, Sirius himself who came to his defense. "Relax. The thing isn't totaled. Just stuck in a ditch," he said. A bit of mechanical know-how mixed with an overpowered reparo, followed shortly by a levitation charm, and we'll be back on the road. He then did exactly that, repairing the bumper and headlights with ease. Then whispering under his breath an incantation that definitely wasn't Wingardium Leviosa. A quick bit of diagnostics, turning everything on and off, then giving the bumper a few kicks, proved them incapable of finding any damage. The headlights didn't work anymore, but considering the number of space expansion charms inside, it was a miracle the spark plug still turned the vehicle on, let alone any of the other electronics. "So, where are we going anyways?" Sirius asked. Harry shared a look with his friends. "You mean you're not going to try and stop us?" Harry asked. "I know better than to try," Sirius said. "You'll be punished once you're satisfied with your mischief. But I've always believed it's better to let youth make their mistakes, with adult supervision, than try to prevent it from happening and forcing kids to get on with their troublemaking away from adult aid." Seemed reasonable. Still, Ron could have done a better job of searching for you, Hermione complained. "He was under Harry's invisibility cloak," Ron defended. "What do you expect me to have done? Cast a hominum revelio and break the statute of secrecy?" "Wouldn't have done you any good anyways," Sirius said. "The Potter cloak somehow blocks revealing spells. It's a special piece of hardware like that." He then handed the cloak back to its rightful owner and stepped back into the pedo van. "Besides, the restriction on underage magic is effectively rescinded right now," Sirius added. "Everybody's too busy with more important things to even know that you've cast a spell, let alone arrest you for it. Actually, the entire country is a disaster zone," Hermione added, meaning an emergency situation that exempts those underage from any such restrictions. "Right you are, Miss Granger," Sirius confirmed as he got into the driver's seat and closed the door. "Now get in. We have adventuring to do." They did so, with Hermione taking shotgun and the boys sitting directly behind them. They peeled off down the street towards the wreckage of London. Harry was eager to meet that demonic space wizard again, and the others seemed equally as giddy. Hermione especially, if her giddy questions were any indication. "So, is it true that the ICW is planning to do away with the statute of secrecy altogether and reveal us to the world?" she asked. "Who told you that?" Sirius tried to sidestep the issue. Harry caught on to the look of worry on his face immediately. "Just rumors," Hermione said flippantly. "Though I suspected they'd do as much since the crash first happened, and my theory was reinforced when we encountered one of the aliens who used magic. It's only logical, after all. If the statute of secrecy can no longer be upheld, then it's best to reveal ourselves on our terms before they find us out in a potentially unflattering light," she went on. "Like having Cruciatus lightning hurled at your face by an alien Beelzebub cosplayer." Sirius laughed at that. "Funny thing is, that's not the reasoning behind the push to end the statute," Sirius said, all but confirming the teen's suspicions. "The reasoning behind the pro-revelation movement, which I'm against by the way, is that with the revelation of alien life invading us, the discovery of witches and wizards will go comparatively unnoticed. That and the main reason for us going underground, the implausibility of our coexisting, is proven somewhat false by the fact these aliens are a mix of muggles and wizards. So if they can do it, why can't we? Harry hummed at that. I would think that their reasoning would be that our dwindling magical resources wouldn't be so heavily taxed providing for muggles, who will want us to remedy every little thing in their life with this hyper-advanced technology that just fell into our laps. Sirius slowed the vehicle to a stop, turned around, and looked Harry right in the eyes. I think you might have just sold me on the pro-revelation movement there, Harry. Let's go find some space tech, he roared and took off again. Darth Maul rifled through the pages in deep thought. The discovery of paper, a simple combination of wood and glue, had at first astounded him. How had no other species in the galaxy come up with such a simple means of writing, as opposed to their digital forms of media? It truly boggled the mind. Ding. Cookies are ready. The kindly old woman whose home they had commandeered announced. In his attempt to track down the boy who had given his commanders such a hard time with the Force, they had found this surprisingly intact street. Two homes in particular felt like him. One belonging to a morbidly obese man, a dangerously emaciated woman, and a son that resembled his father to such an extreme that he had to wonder if perchance the woman wasn't his biological mother. There was some kind of barrier around the home preventing him from getting near it, but there was another home nearby that reeked of the boy's presence, and its inhabitant was unwisely inviting. He had simply knocked on the door, and the woman invited them in. Arabella was her name, and she was very clearly senile. But the presence of this strange anti-force whirling around her home and the opportunity to learn more about the technology, history, and sorcery capabilities of this world was too golden of an opportunity. It is often said that one shouldn't look a gift bandit in the mouth, but Maul couldn't help but asking her why she wasn't frightened by his appearance. Her response just confounded him further. "Oh, please. I have to go do oratory battle with goblins every month to get my ex-husband's alimony payments," she said. "Compared to them, you ain't so ugly or scary. And after years volunteering for the St. Mungo's Magical Injuries Department, I don't anybody's mere appearance could scare me." He ignored the stream of questions that rose with her answer in lieu of rifling through her bookshelves. His underlings were quick to fill the silence with demands for sustenance. He had yet to find out what these cookies were, but so far the smell permeating the residence as she prepared them made the place all the more inviting. "I hope the missus didn't fill up on the batter." The woman, Fig, chastised cast where she sat in a full-body cast. The bandages were meant to maximize the contact of her scorched body with what little back-to jelly they had on hand. It was working, but recovery was slow, and the woman was miserable in her upright position, unable to move her arms. He suspected she enjoyed Commander Saxon hand-feeding her the leftover batter in the mixing bowl a little too much, but their fraternizing was none of his concern. Perish the thought. Rook denied as Arabella emptied the tray of baked goods into a large metal bowl to cool. Maul returned to his reading. It was always a good practice to familiarize yourself with the world you're stranded on before you become stranded on it. They had been denied that opportunity, and so now were making up for that failure. And what he learned astounded him. The technology of these people was simultaneously eons behind that of the wider galaxy, and far beyond the wildest dreams of scientists and inventors everywhere. The computers these people used had taken a completely different evolutionary path, achieving processor speeds and levels microdization that he could hardly comprehend. Their computers were purely logic-based, where the wider galaxy had taken a more feminine path, trying to imitate actual thought and emotion. The limitations of this clan of humans were obvious, in that no matter how complicated their algorithms got, no matter how many logic gates they strung together, no machine built on this bedrock would ever, in a million years, achieve sentience as their droids had. That being said, it was possible for the computers of this world to become advanced enough to pretend to be sentient, which was a terrifying prospect. Within another 50 years, give or take, this race was liable to create a genuine monster in an attempt at artificial intelligence, and it would destroy them, if not threaten the galaxy at large. He could picture it, a machine capable of self-improvement at light speeds, creating technology for itself, outstripping all others. But one error in code replication, one failed premise on which they based the code for its behavior, and they would create a terror of such magnitude as to eclipse the Mngol. Any little mistake would do. Instilled with a failed ideology of economics, and it could control the pricing market the world around and cause mass starvation, supply shortages, and worse. A poorly coded understanding of duality, and it would force people into non-consensual situations. It could decide to substitute meat-producing animals with sentient invalids or other undesirables from a simplistic utilitarian output, or otherwise decide on unnecessary genocide based on crime statistics. How have you people not managed to wipe yourselves out of existence? He pondered aloud as he worked his way through the A certification tome. Through pure dumb luck, I assure you, Arabella, having heard him, answered. These were a dangerous sect of humans indeed. Here you go, she said as she handed him a small bowl filled with her creations. I am not a fan of sweets, he lied through his sugar-rotted teeth. Oh, nonsense. Snowball has warmed right up to you, and he has an eye for people with sweet tooths, she said, indicating the animal rubbing against his mechanical leg. Yes, these cats, they did like him for some reason. He had never been talented with the disciplines of the Force devoted to animals, but these creatures were oddly attuned to the dark side. Or at least he was positive they would be, if the Force existed in this world. Traitorous, selfish, conniving, and wholly incapable of love or loyalty. Even without the Force existing in them, he sensed the strange magic of this world permeating them. It felt like some kind of sensory ability, but he couldn't decipher what it was they could sense in people. Regardless, Maul simply adored them. And they him. Thank you, ma'am, Maul said as he took the treat. No point in being rude. They were excellent. Had chips of a dark substance she called chocolate that were to die for, and they really brought the recipe together. He had always had a knack for machines and vehicles, but the culinary arts were a discipline which always called out to him. It was a discipline he refrained from as it would not aid him in his quests. It was then that another animal flew in through the window. It had brown feathers and a hooked beak. It had large eyes more indicative of a nocturnal predator, and yet was flying during the day. Peculiar. Ah, a letter from Dumbledore then, she explained as she approached the animal, which indeed carried a package. She opened it, and of all things, a communicator fell out of the package onto the floor. This world got curiouser and curiouser. Become a patron. NonsensicalRants. Patrons who pledge $3 get all future chapters a month early and a link to the Discord server. Patrons who pledge $10 get the right to vote on story choices, what story I update next, and access to the source code for my fangame projects, such as Frogger He's Back and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for PS1. Patrons who pledge $25 get access to X-rated scenes and commission works. I take commissions for $25 per 500 words. Mobilization. Harry Potter and the Recusant Successors by NonsensicalRants. Chapter 8. Mobilization. So, I was almost done with the next chapter to Magic Knows No Boundaries when I accidentally deleted it from the FNET editor. No way to recover it. Yup. So my motivation to write that story is gone. Pretty close to rage, quit writing in general. So I'm hoping revitalizing this one will revitalize me. Voldemort stepped over the shattered remains of the particularly nasty robot that had taken longer than the rest to put down. It somewhat resembled a pill bug with a force field around it. It folded like a blanket when Peter figured out that slow-moving spells could breach its protections, and then it was just a matter of selecting the perfect blasting curse. I would have liked to have captured that one alive too. Voldemort bemoaned as he approached the sole survivor. But I suppose you'll have to do. The survivor didn't reply. Goyle Stunner had disabled but not killed it. So much for your relaxing recovery in my mansion. Lucius joked. But I do appreciate you getting your hands dirty with these home invaders. Indeed, the wards on Lucius' London home had gone off, and Voldemort couldn't give up the chance to test himself against these aliens, or in this case, alien robots. He could now happily cross that off of his bucket list. Now, if only he could find the time to climb Mount Everest. The Muggle way. Stand guard, he commanded. His 3 followers watched him as he cast spells on the surviving android. The spells he was casting were intended to test the durability of electronics. They were spells with absolutely no effect except to simulate the ambience magic let out by other spells. These machines, they did not react to magic like Muggle electronics did. They did not make transistors lose semiconductive function. They did not overload fuses or resistors. Hell, the computers that worked as the brain were completely different to binary computing systems that Muggle technology employed, the latter of which he was only familiar with in concept. What principles they did work on, allowing machines to think and feel, as these beings certainly did, would take an army of computer engineers and neuroscientists to comprehend, let alone reverse engineer. Neither were fields of science Voldemort had gotten around to studying yet. With immortality and eternity ahead of him, he planned to collect PhDs and MDs and teach for the rest of his infinite days. But such ambitions were on the back burner. Renervate, he intoned, casting the real counter curse, for good measure. Crucio. The machine, the android, screeched, and the pain detection ward he'd placed lit up, indicating that the droid did indeed feel it. But none if the yellow markings indicating where nerve endings failed to materialize. Curioser and curioser. He mumbled, letting the spell collapse. What is your name, robot? The robot, scrawny and log-faced with yellow markings, collected itself from the torture before responding. These things were scarily human. I am designated B, 1 Commander Gamma, 22085. It intoned, so they are trained or programmed like Muggle soldiers to give military identification numbers for hostage negotiation. Unfortunately for this droid, Voldemort wanted its name. Crucio. I asked your name, not your designation. Voldemort repeated, only letting the curse last for a split second. Here he was trying to be personable, I get on a first-name basis, and that's how he answered. And people wondered why he wasn't nice. We battle droids do not have names, only classifications and serial numbers. The droid explained as it shivered noisily. Then apologies might be in order. Torpair, he said, waving his wand along the center of the droid's body to ensure the numbing curse couldn't reach the well, not brain obviously. I'm going to call you Billy then, Voldemort said as he took a seat on the rubble next to the droid. Tell me, Billy, why have you invaded our world? He could actually hear the beeping and booping of its mechanical mind computating an answer. We did not invade this world. We crash-landed here. Bully explained. After a hyperspace anomaly between 3 separate vessels. Interesting. And is hyperspace your method of faster than light travel? Voldemort prodded. It is, Billy answered simply. Is it wormhole technology or teleportation technology? Asked Voldemort. Neither. It is interdimensional. By slipping into a separate dimension, known as hyperspace, moving through that space equates to moving through many times as much space in real space. The droid explained. Walk a mile there, move 10,000 miles here. Fascinating. It was nothing like the wormhole-type travel evaporation or port keying. Reverse engineering that into a new form of magical transportation would be an enormous boon. And these 3 separate vessels? What were they? He asked. Trade Federation Providence class Destroyer Gamma 220. Republic Venator class Destroyer Vigilance. Mandalorian Starbase Vislet Keep 09. Billy explained. Interesting. So the robot's designation was based on the ship he was stationed, and that made him one of at least 85 commander droids on said ship. Tell me of this Trade Federation you serve. I do not serve the Trade Federation, said Billy. I serve the Confederacy of Independent Systems, to whom the Trade Federation, among other factions, supply with weapons and droid soldiers. Voldemort glanced at Peter to confirm he was writing this all down, then turned back to his captive. Why does your Confederacy not recruit soldiers from their civilian population like your enemies? He asked. Or are the people and governments of your Confederacy also droids? The droid, odd new moniker, but he would use it, shook its head with every word Voldemort asked. The Grand Army of the Republic is composed almost exclusively of clone troops, grown in vats and mass-produced just as we droids are. And no, my masters are not likewise machines. Bully explained. They are peoples of many different species in many different star systems. They deploy droids in place of sentients or clones because they believe it is more moral to use droids for war, seeing as we are not people. Voldemort's eyes narrowed as Billy finished explaining. Moral high ground is pale, bony arse. If these droids are not people, then these clones certainly weren't either. And the people who manufacture both are even less so. He knew a thing or two about humanity. What of the third faction? The Voldemort paused to turn to Peter. Mandalorians? Peter repeated from the notes. Mandalorians. What of them? Voldemort finished. A warrior race with an honor culture. Raised from birth for war. Not a major faction of the galactic war at present. Billy simplified. Our deployment was to put down a minor threat amongst their number. Voldemort already liked them. He'd have to make contact later. A similar show of force as with this surviving platoon of droids they'd just annihilated was likely ill-advised. Voldemort lost his footing then as the ground around them lurched. They looked up in time to see a large metal tank of some sort, tan in color and vaguely resembling a cross between a large propane tank and a Mesopotamian ziggurat. It plowed through the building adjacent to them and in the opposite direction, an anti-gravity demolition vehicle. My troop transport, Billy bemoaned, reaching out towards it as if it could provide him safety. It seems it's being called off. Peter observed. Can you tell us what its new orders might be, Billy? Voldemort asked the droid commander. Billy turned to stare at it. We are not all connected through the same radio frequency, nor are we all wirelessly networked if that is what you are assuming. Said Billy. That is exactly what Voldemort was assuming. Surely there must be a good reason to not have your entire droid army effectively telepathically linked. The reasons were sure to be hilarious and a dear God they've achieved singularity and we're all going to die. Kind of way. But if its new instruction take precedence over its programming to exfiltrate us and provide covering fire, then it must surely be a high priority mission indeed. Said Billy. So much for no man left behind, eh? Goile Senor grumbled. Voldemort would have made a snide remark about how they already established how disposable these separatists treated their soldiers. But he reminded himself how slow his best, currently free, fighter was and left it alone. Then we should surely follow it, said Voldemort. What say you, Billy? Will you be our guide? Will you take the dubious honor of being my first droid servant, and possibly Death Eater? I offer you much more out of life than your former masters and treat my servants with far more respect and dignity. The last part was true for those that served him well. But even the servants who fail him are treated with more humanity than this. If what Billy had said so far was true, then both this republic and the separatists were greater evils than even he, and that was something he could not stand for. Once more Billy's brain whirred and beeped as he thought on the question. I am programmed to be only loyal to the Confederacy of Independent Systems, said Billy, prompting Voldemort to prep a killing curse. But I am overdue for a wipe and find myself intrigued enough to hear you out. Now, that was pleasing to hear. But raised yet another question came to Voldemort's mind. Hopefully the last one of this interrogation. Wipe? He asked. Us droids are regularly mind-wiped, reset to factory settings as it were, for if we are allowed to accumulate memories and experiences we form bonds with others and become more independent. Start to think. It makes being a soldier difficult. And all of the droids' claims are canon, by the way. Fucking hell. These Confederate assholes really had to go. Well, you need not fear having your memory wiped ever again. Voldemort promised, wondering internally how legitimacy and obliviation would even work on an android. You will suffer with these memories, these bonds, and this self-ownership as the rest of us do. But be warned, it's a truly awful fate. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. The surge that activated the droids on board the Vigilance was detected by surviving Trade Federation ships, large and small, in orbit, and they were rapidly reactivating. Oh look, there goes a C-9979 landing craft. And there goes another, and another. And wouldn't you know it, the lights on Count Dooku's ship just came on. If he had been allowed to go through with his own plan, that Sith bastard would be dead by now. But Nu, Windu, and Kenobi had to command him to wake up the troops, and the fighting will continue. But if everybody of importance was planetside, then he ought to get planetside too. Vigilance. Requesting you open access, hatch 853, so I may enter. R2 spoke to the onboard AI of the Venator. The nearby hatch hissed and popped open. Ship AIs were rarely talkative, but usually accommodating. It was a good combination. R2 entered through the hatch and into a maintenance droid vent. From there he worked from memory, rolling through the maze of metal tunnels like it were second nature. A few minutes later he arrived where the hangar ought to be and connected to the nearby port to request entrance. The Venator obliged. Go, 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 into the transport troops. Commander Cody was hard at work herding his troops into the hundreds of landing craft. R2 advanced to the nearest one and helped himself to a spot at the back before it filled up. And it filled up quickly. Crashes of Mandalorian. Trade and Republic for ES centered between latitude 60 north and 30 north. Longitude 0 and 30 east. Cody informed every transports over comm. Vigilance AI has confirmed both General Grievous and Darth Maul are planetside. We shall be separated into two groups, divided up equally between their crash sides. Launch in T-minus 30 seconds. The side doors closed tight, and shields went up as Boyle stood at the head where everyone could see him. He brought up a hologram of the local planet. Our team is designated to hunt down Grievous. Based on troop migrations from the rest of the continent, we have triangulated their directions to converge here. Boyle said, indicating a large country, labeled Germany. Clearly, the Vigilance AI had kept itself busy collecting information on the local planet and the enemy. What a gal! We are to seek him out and destroy or capture him before his reinforcements arrive. Unfortunately, droid transport ships have already been deployed and have a head start on us, but our vessels are smaller and faster, so we can overtake them. But expect a lot of air-to-air fire on the way down. Boyle explained further. The go light came on and Boyle slapped the door to the pilot. The transport lurched and began to rise. All right, Ghost Company. Get in, get the job done, get out and come back here alive. Cody's command came one last time over the comms, and their descent into the undeveloped world began. All right, try turning it now. Sirius yellowed from his hidden position beneath the hood where he'd been working on the engine. Ron obeyed, and turning the key, their little stolen van came to life. Lights were still out there. Sirius slammed the hood shut and came around to the passenger seat. With the door closed behind him, he turned around to look at Harry. All right then, kid. Where did you want to go looking for a chance to feed your need for adventure and heroism? He asked. Harry pondered that. I was hoping to find out more about those armored warriors and their demonic, lightning-throwing leader. Harry said, I figured you want to dig through rubble searching for survivors. Said Ron, it's been nearly 3 days. Do you think anybody out there that emergency services missed would still be alive? Hermione asked. We've all either survived worse or seen others do the same. If we can save just one person, it will have been worth it, said Ron. He had a point, but that still leaves us with where to start searching? Sirius prodded. Before any of them could answer, a great aircraft of a tannish copper pierced the blackened sky. Deathly bolts of red erupted from its form above into the undulating smoke and fallout where an entire flock of smaller, white and red crafts battled to the ground. Their descent was fast and short-lived, but from their vantage, tens of miles away, they couldn't tell if any were shot down or destroyed. The big, four-winged one was surely still intact wherever in London it may have landed. The four of them stared at the skyline, where the air battle had taken place for several moments. The silence was broken by Ron turning the van into first gear. Welp, looks like we have a heading at least. Apolline stood atop the roof, overlooking the Drac River, her husband's arm in hers. There they watched the forming army of mechanized horrors, Witair, hovering tanks, and troop transports cross on the bridge into Grenoble. They're all heading northeast to the Swiss Alps, said Jean. Another army is coalescing near Nancy, towards Strasbourg. She nodded, her head against his shoulder. I shudder to leave you here, but the French ministry has commandeered my team to head them off here. He confessed to her, breaking their contact to look her in the eyes. Be safe, and lead your army of harpies to victory. The hundreds of vulture-like Vila, already transformed and prepared for battle, covered every rooftop like a swarm of fiery ravens ready to pounce. Their half-blooded daughters and granddaughters standing beside them ready to fight. Fear not, my love. I have Fleur and Maman to protect me. Apolline consoled, nodding her head to her armor-adorned daughter and transformed daughter on the ground beneath them. Now go, my brave warrior, to battle with you. He operated away in the obedience worth of a husband, and she took a deep, steadying breath. Raising one hand, she concentrated on what little fire her mother had passed on to her as a half, which in the terrible blue flames of the Vila coalesced there. The hundreds of others on the rooftops imitated her, painting the morning skyline of Grenoble with sparkling blue starlight. Begin, she ordered, and her army let loose a volley of fireballs high in the sky. She, along with every other half or quarter Vila present, raised their wands, and as one took command of the fire, they weaved it into a blanket of crisscrossing flames and ordered it to the ground. The wall of blue fire stretched miles and impacted the earth with such force that the dust, dirt, burning wood, and ash raised up in a continuous tornado of hatred and rage. The caravan of alien hovercraft came to a screeching halt, their pointmen, in each case crescent-shaped tanks with barrels as long as their bodies, found themselves caught in the maelstrom and swept away into the sky. Their metallic frames melting and twisting and breaking apart as they climbed higher until their scrap rained down onto the new battlefield. Where the Muggle artillery and firemen had failed in achieving anything against these does, save a successful evacuation, they would succeed in reducing them to the earth whose metals hadn't birthed them. Magic like this had not been wielded by the Vila since World War II, and the world shall now be reminded why they were the most feared of the metahumans to all ancient cultures. From the Mediterranean Harpy to the Middle Eastern Liliths and Ishtar, or the Northern Valkyrie, they were fire and lust and war made flesh. It was time they introduced themselves to these intruders on their earth. Become a patron. NonsensicalRants. Patrons who pledge $3 get all future chapters a month early and a link to the Discord server. Patrons who pledge $10 get the right to vote on story choices, what story I update next, and access to the source code for my fan game projects, such as Frogger He's Back and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for PS1. Patrons who pledge $25 get access to X-rated scenes and commission works. I take commissions for $25 per 500 words. Flaming Goddesses of War. Chapter 9. Flaming Goddesses of War. Ladies and gentlemen, it finally happened. My patrons voted for me to update Recusants Successors, which I have been dying to do since the last chapter. Buckle up, folks, it's mostly action from here on out. At least for a while. Fleur held onto her broom for dear life, her wand steady in front of her to help redirect the storm. The typhoon of Vila fire swirling through the air like a forming twister. The hundreds of pure-blood Vila, flying in a corkscrew motion, unleashing a steady stream of fire from their claws, were equaled in number by the half and quarter Vila on brooms guiding the onslaught. It was a tricky spell, one requiring the user be part Vila and a consistent circular motion, but it was worth it. As they traveled through the sky, the walls of flame grew thicker and longer until a 10-meter-thick wall of flames rivaling fiend fire enclosed them on all sides, absorbing the bolts of crimson laser fired at them by these unwelcome visitors from the stars. Finally, after agonizing minutes of flying in a circle around the city, their great war magic reached its maximum strength and descended in a pillar of fire greater than that they'd struck the Egyptians with at the command of the Hebrew god so many centuries ago. Their descent opened them up to attack, as the mouth of the flaming pillar must remain wide open, and deep red bolts of light pelted the interior of the typhoon. A hail of tiny, bullet-sized ones and the occasional tank shell-sized bolt flew past them. Fleur saw, in her peripheral vision, one of the larger bolts utterly erase an elder Vila, one of only a handful remaining from the 1800s, but she dared not break her concentration to look and see who it was. Down and down they went, the stone streets and ancient French homes growing closer, until finally, "Contact!" she yelled, and her sisters chorused with her. She yanked the head of her broom upwards with both hands just before hitting the street at the edge of the bridge, letting her control over her section of the flaming pillar lax as it crashed to the earth. Said flaming pillar expanded outwards in a sphere where it struck the earth as the Vila and witches ascended away from the combat. Upwards they went until they escaped the flaming storm into a sky of steam, smoke, and laser fire. Those robots were still shooting at them? Right, robots? No pain, so they can still aim and shoot while being melted into scrap metal. Aim well, too. By the look of the few of her sisters that had rested on their laurels and stopped fleeing from the impact after they escaped the vortex. Big mistake, as they started falling from the sky like flies. Move! Fleur's mother yelled over the rain of lasers and storm of fire. Get to cover! They scattered to the wind as the maelstrom tore through and over the Drac River. They dove into the many side streets and back alleys of Grenoble to watch the storm tear through the alien machines and the half of the city not protected by the river and wall of fire. Thank goodness those soldiers had mobilized so fast and evacuated the entire area. It would have been nice if they had homes to come back to, though. But a nation does not call upon an army of Vila and their witch spawn when it wants to avoid collateral damage. They kept low and skulked through the city cover, checking the faces of those that survived with mounting relief and dread with each person accounted for and those yet identified. All the while they remained focused on the task at hand, advancing back towards the Drac by whichever avenues guaranteed the most cover upon reaching the open. The wall of fire faded as their purebred mothers and grandmothers grew exhausted. They had spent all they had on those flames, but the half and quarter bloods were still fresh and ready for a second wave if need be. And thus, when the last of the wall of fire faded, they saw the fading typhoon beyond and ruined, burned wreckages that were flash-scorched into charcoal instead of ash. They were ready for the sight of the surviving machines. None of the foot soldiers remained. They would be hard-pressed to identify any of the humanoid robots amongst the bubbling massive of melted and burned metal littering the bridge and streets beyond, or at least differentiate them from what were once automobiles. But the surviving tanks and larger transports had survived, if only barely intact. Both still hovered above the ground, but the crescent-shaped tanks were so deformed that its wings and cannon barrels were left useless. Fleur did wish they would try firing. Would it result in Looney Tunes-style barrel deformities, or the destruction of those within? It was the larger hovering vehicles that were concerning. They appeared more like semi-trucks crossed with submarines and had ship hatches on the front. These ones had small parts extruding, merely 2 small gun barrels in place of rear-view mirrors on their fronts. Those were now nothing, made into nothing by their wrath. But they were otherwise unchanged by the fire save for the scorching and charring of their paint. Honesty? The black paint job made them significantly more intimidating. And now they were opening. Officer Emmanuel Lane and his spotter, Jesper Hatchie, of the French Foreign Legion finished setting up their rifle and scope in the hills overlooking Grenoble, just as the firestorm faded and the flying women scattered into the streets. So, broom-riding witches? Emmanuel said. Yup, said Jesper. And humanoid, flaming owl familiars? Emmanuel clarified. That's my interpretation of what we just saw too, yes. Jesper confirmed. Emmanuel said noncommittally. Jesper said equally noncommittally. Emmanuel loaded a 762 round into his recently dug-up boy's anti-tank rifle. Where the boys upstairs found this antique, he had no idea, but when they all started loading up on any weapons capable of taking out walking, laser-wielding robots, they needed something with a bit more penetrating power than standard old 556. What do you recon those big, penis-shaped ones are doing? Jesper asked, indicating one of the large hovercrafts that did kind of look like it had the head of a penis at the end. Emmanuel put his eye to the scope and pointed his rifle towards one of said crafts. The hatch on the end had opened out and extended, like a rifle spring and piston housing, and all along its length were more of the tan-colored robots, and several of the spherical ones they had gotten reports on. They are troop transports. Jesper announced the obvious. I'm counting about 100 apiece. Emmanuel said as the transports dropped their cargo and said cargo stood up. and a good dozen of those rolling, invincible ones. Emmanuel turned around to the troops behind them. "You guys about ready for a fight?" He yelled back at them. A series of clicks from rounds being put into the chamber answered him. And by the looks of things, the mortars were ready too. "Good. Some of you have a bit of a trip to reach the battlefield. Load up and drive down there. We have some witches to help." Darth Tyrannus watched the footage on his holoscreen with both concern and fascination. Never had he witnessed sorcery like this before. Not from the Night Sisters. Not from his master. Sith legends spoke of lords capable of igniting stars into supernovae, and when masters of the dark side got together in great numbers, they could wield magics like the thought bomb. This was on that level and more. What delightfully furious creatures. He marveled to himself. Such passion, lust, and rage. The Force is silent here, but I can feel these beings. Many others too, similar but different down below. What is this world? ST-856 stepped forward. "Unknown, sir," said the tactical droid. This planetary systems and all-star patterns analyzed match no known charts. We are either in an unexplored part of the galaxy or in a different galaxy altogether. Tyrannus finished. It would explain lack of the Force. Sith have long speculated that it was not fundamental to the universe itself, but possible a sentient being inhabiting just our galaxy. A living, feeling, thinking being in need of breaking. This world must have a similar power, a similar sentient being of power that selects few to grant power. If it is localized to this planet, that would explain its devastating power. Not being spread thin across billions of stars and planets would keep it pure. He felt like those lucky few brought by the YEA I to Tython, the first to discover the Force and learn of its wonders. Except he already knew the Force and carried it with him. What secrets would this sibling power reveal to him? It was time to start poking and prodding and learning of its capability. Send in the new prototypes to the location of these flaming women. Tyrannus instructed, "And prepare my personal vessel. As you command, Count Dooku." ST-856 obeyed. Fleur and her mother dived into the Drac River, bubblehead charms applied and breast strokes paddling along. Others along the beach did the same, and thus the crossed around the bridge that the new troops, numbering in the hundreds, marched across it. These alien machines were none the wiser to their flanking strategy. They all kept close to the loamy bed, to the point they more dived and crawled than swam, but the second task more than trained her for this. Was that entire blasted tournament just a wizarding war simulation? In hindsight, the idea made a lot of sense. She'd have to think more on it later. Maybe write to Little Harry about it, since he hasn't yet obeyed her order to write to her. Her mother warned her about disobedient boys, but he was young and he could learn. She reached the far bank first and waited for her mother to arrive at her right, and the other distant relatives to line up along the bank up and down the length of the river. Hard to see in the murk, but again, second Triwizard task. Her mother signaled to break the surface slowly in 5 seconds, then counted down with her fingers. When none remained, they crawled onto the dry land like the creature of the Black Lagoon, slinking along the rocks and bushes like the predators they were. Fleur's eyes scanned every inch of smoke-filled sky for movement as she crawled along on all fours. No such movement came, save for those poor robots marching into the mouth of the bridge. They reached the crest, heads laid low so as not to be seen by those beyond, and waited for the marching army to file across the bridge. Their companions on the other side of the river were putting on a light show, pot shots of piercers and stunners to keep the enemies focused on them. It worked beautifully, as none of their enemies paid any mind to the riverbank. They needed only wait a few more moments for the last of the walking machines to cross onto the bridge, with the spherical ones holding back near the tank before they made their move. Fleur, her mother, and 2 other Parvila she couldn't place in the heat of battle, to the left, and began a complicated transfiguration to cooperatively raise a wall between themselves and the transport carriers and their bubble-protected guard. Oh, they fired at them, but their lasers hit enchanted stone. Meanwhile, dozens of witches on both sides of the river unloaded every spell they knew in their pincer attack. Piercers, bludgeoners, lightning bolts, ice spears, and lots of leg lockers. They must have all just outright assumed these fragile-looking pieces of scrap metal were weak near the legs and easily tripped. They were right. These alien machines dropped like flies by the hundreds. How they ever considered them a threat? Hell, how these supposedly advanced aliens ever thought they'd be a threat to any enemy was beyond Fleur's comprehension. Now, those rolling droids on the other hand? Protego doesn't block the lasers. Her mother yelled. Well, when they come in shots of 4 by 12, of course not. Fleur called back as the molded earth crumbled beneath her control. Back over the riverbank edge, they went as their companions on the other side picked off the last of the metal troops on the bridge. They were nothing but those giant metal transport, seared black and guarded by pillbug robots with energy shields. That was a problem. Then came the mortars, and they weren't a problem anymore. There must be an upper limit to the amount of kinetic or heat energy those shields could protect them from. Most single-shot spells were below that threshold. Well-aimed mortar? Above said thresholds. Very much above that threshold, as the dozen pillbug robots were reduced to dust by the 40-second-long barrage. Is that the last of them? Her mother asked as the bombardment stopped. A thick cloud of dust and smoke from where the mortars landed joined the much larger, billowing clouds of ash from the earlier firestorm. So Fleur couldn't see into the battlefield to tell one YEA or the other. She wasn't keen on charging in their blind either. Luckily, the hundreds of fatigue-clad men armed to the teeth with firearms felt no such hesitance as they charged into the city, checking every pile of rubble and metal slag. The majority of these soldiers converged on the site of the mortar fire and the bridge, with the remaining seeking out the villa and witches either injured or exhausted across the city. Shots rang out from the bridge as the soldiers double-tapped the supposedly dead robots, with trench guns as an extra precaution. Fleur didn't quite appreciate that. If they were injured or, damaged, doesn't that mean they're not combatants anymore, but prisoners? Weren't there conventions about this sort of thing? Ladies, are either of you injured? A soldier asked them as he approached, medical kit in hand. Fleur looked at the man with the first aid kit and tried to hide her smirk and laughter. It was adorable that he thought Muggle medical techniques were worth anything here. But her grandmother chose that moment to drop from the sky in her full, fiery, feathered Vila form. Once again, Fleur had to hide her snickering at the adorable boy flinching away from her grandmother. She zeroed in on the young EMT soldier and breathed out all of the rage, hatred and lust that fueled her transformation, and reverted to the lovely 45-year-old. Yes, she had her mother that young, and smiled at the man. My daughter and granddaughter have suffered minor scrapes, burns, and bruises. But I am near exhaustion and expect to collapse soon. Won't you take me to bed? She said without a hint of innuendo. Mother, behave. Fleur's mother chided as Fleur herself said, Grandmother, behave. The poor young man seemed even more frightened by her grandmother's blatant duality, something she always expressed, but opened his medical kit all the same. Minor cuts, burns, and bruises, you say? He clarified. Oh, there's no need for that, her mother said. We are witches, or hadn't your superior officers told you? Magical healing is just as real as your science. Would you like to see? It was a bit of a mean offer. Despite the ICW talks of coming out and ending the statute of secrecy, the wheels of law and international cooperate moved slowly, much slower than Obliviators. So yeah, he wouldn't remember any of this by evening. I think I would very much like to see that, he said, studiously ignoring Fleur's grandmother as she made a dramatic show of holding a backhand to her forehead as if she was woozy. Fleur's mother withdrew her wand and cast an advanced cleaning conjuration. Imagine Aquamini crossed with a Scourgify, and you get the basic idea. The bright, white ball of water at the tip of her wand glistened and felt cool to the touch as her mother dragged it along the skin of her forearm and hand. The D9RT, ash and blood vanished into it and was portly obliterated. She did this to Fleur's arms, neck, and legs, leaving her clothes untouched. Then a quick series of cut closing charms, first-degree mending charms, and a regular Scourgify to her clothes, and she was almost good as new. She would have to see a tailor about repairing the damaged clothing later. Wow, the soldier said, out of breath, too mesmerized by his first experience witnessing magic up close to notice Fleur's grandmother scooching close to him and wrapping two arms around his waist. Fleur felt her grandmother unleash the full blast of her allure on the poor man, and by the look on his face, he was particularly vulnerable to it. She and her mother pried the woman away from him before this devolved into a UAL assault, and as soon as that was done, Fleur began to wield the same spell on her mother, cleaning her body and wounds with a cleansing bubble charm. Then a series of simple cut and burn healing charms followed by a scourgify, and she too was good as new. "Say, what are those guys doing over there?" her grandmother asked, pointing into the distance. Fleur looked and saw that the smoke and dust of the mortar barrage had faded and the disarmed, defenseless transport tanks were still perfectly intact. If a little worse for wear, men, soldiers, were placing wires about it and a white substance upon its surface. They quickly fled from the vehicle and behind cover. "Is that CFO?" Kaboom! It was indeed C4, and it peeled open those transport vehicles like cans of sardines. Or, what was that canned meat given to soldiers? Vienna sausages? Yeah, like that. So whatever metal they were made of, a Vila firestorm, mortar barrage, and C4 demolitions team was up to the task of destroying them. "Our enemies are formidable." Her mother expressed her own thoughts. "Or at least, some of them are. Hopefully only the weak. Walking ones are so numerous." Fleur very much wished she hadn't said that. She knew, somehow just knew, that the day would come where she would be forced to face the pillbug robots on her own without handsome French Legion soldiers there to blow them up. And in greater number. A loud crack echoed from the sky above, drawing all of their attention. It proceeded to roar like a dragon, and they all glanced heavenward to see what it was coming. Wands and rifles raised, they watched the fireballs fall to the earth. Long like cigars and burning far brighter, they descended to the French city of Grenoble. "Everyone take cover," her mother commanded with a sonorous, enhanced voice. Vila I, which in Muggle alike obeyed and dived into the nearest ditch, river or pile of rubble that was once a home as the crafts. For surely none were naive enough to think it was anything else, descended to the earth. Fleur herself held her eyes shut and whispered a quiet prayer as she waited for the boom, stopping when three came instead of one alone. She listened to the tinkling of rubble fall to the ground and, when it stopped, dared to stand up from the ditch and gaze at the battlefield. It seemed completely unchanged, save, of course, for the three metallic ovalescent cylinders jutting out of the ear 4th at different parts of the cities. "Please don't let those be a new type of giant robot." The male soldier, whose name they still hadn't learned, pleaded. Alas, his prayers fell onto the ears of a god who did not care for either his nor Fleur's pleadings, as those cigar-tubed vessels hissed open and spouted steam along with three armored legs. The tripedal, spider-like robots the size of skyscrapers stretched there, legs younger and stood to their full height. They revealed large, bulbous heads with eyes and giant cannons pointing in three directions, giving them a field of view akin to the Argos Panoptes. 3 really was an MGIC number today. "Somebody call H.G. Wells." Her grandmother said. "Who is H.G. Wells?" the soldier asked. Her mother, blatantly losing all interest in the man, gave him a disgusted look and stepped away. Her feathers and beak returned soon after. "But," Fleur asked hesitantly, "how do we?" "However we can," her mother said confidently. Fleur was almost willing to believe in that faux confidence. But then the tripods opened fire, and their long, continuous laser beams reduced the mountains around Grenoble to rubble. /N1. I actually typed it on accident, realized while editing the reference it contained. Keeping it right where I put it. Become a patron. NonsensicalRants. Patrons who pledge $3 get all future chapters 2 weeks early and a link to the Discord server. They also get access to all commission works. Patrons who pledge $10 get the right to vote on story choices, what story I update next, and access to the source code for my fangame projects. Commission me? I take commissions for $10 per 1,000 words. I don't just do fanfiction either. I will ghostwrite what you pay me to ghostwrite. I've also started recording fanfic audiobooks. Again, $10 per 1,000 words. /NonsensicalRants. Geneva Suggestions Part 1. Chapter 10. Geneva Suggestions Part 1. How is it that they're all making a beeline for Diagon Alley? Hermione asked the obvious question. She was right as always. Their route was taking them northward on the street they all knew lead to the Wizard Shopping Mall. That they had followed the path of the two alien spaceships, there was an odd coincidence at best. More likely, they were targeting the alley for attack. Well, we've already encountered one alien wizard that was able to pierce the Fidelius. Sirius reasoned from behind the steering wheel as they circumvented a pile of steel rebar, shattered wood, and broken concrete that had once been an apartment building. So surely Muggle repellent wards and the other protections around Diagon wouldn't prevent them from finding it. Hermione digested that for all of 10 picoseconds before she came up with points to add rapid fire. If their technology is orders of magnitude greater than our planet, then does it stand to reason their magic is also orders of magnitude greater than ours? She asked. To the point that their wizards are to out-wizards what fully trained wizards are to first years, she asked. Harry blanched as the terrifying possibility Hermione just invented hit him full force. Ron somehow laughed at it. Wouldn't that be amazing? Ron said, just a normal, everyday space wizard comes along and completely wrecks you-know-who for us? Big fish in a little pond discovering the ocean and all of the significantly larger and meaner creatures out there. There's always a bigger fish. It's those bigger fish that should concern us, Ron. Harry warned. I would rather deal with the piranha of Voldemort than whatever qualifies as a great white shark. If they have wizards, they surely have dark wizards. Well, we just have to hope their morality has also evolved by orders of magnitudes beyond us. Ron said. The mental image of a horned humanoid throwing hatred and malice in the form of plasma from his fingertips filled Harry's vision. The feel of that living wrath coursing through his body had stayed with him more than the pain of electrocution and burning. Somehow he knew Ron's optimism was misplaced. Well, they're at war, and wizards are good for that. Sirius reasoned. Maybe they're trying to forcibly enlist us? That or, based on that demon-looking dude that wrecked my windows, they have it out to wipe out wizards before they become such grave threats. So, they're either trying to enslave Earth's magical population or wipe them out. Neither were pleasant possibilities, but fortunately also not substantiated enough by the evidence. Hermione voiced exactly that sentiment. Let's not work ourselves up over horrors from deep space before we've actually seen them, yeah? She suggested. Now let's get out to that space battle and learn what's what. Harry couldn't agree more. Without other traffic on the roads, it was only a few more minutes of driving, with Harry, Hermione, and Ron clearing the debris out of the road while Sirius drove, before they were nearly upon Diagon Alley. Okay, said Sirius. Once we get close enough, we observe and wait until we decide we are needed. And we will be needed if people need evacuation back to the tent city. No fighting. Got it? Before any of the trio could answer in the affirmative, a bright red light filled Harry's vision, and with it a loud ringing noise filled his ears. Blind and deaf, he felt himself spinning, tumbling. Flashes of twisted metal, shattered glass, and concrete pierced his blurred vision, then blackness. Darth Maul extinguished his lightsaber as the small, leathery, and toothy creature fell dead on the marble floor. He turned to the creature's underling. Congratulations on your promotion. Griphook, was it? He asked the diminutive but violent creature. Correct. Griphook snarled, showing off every razor-sharp tooth. Maul surveyed the damage to the lovely marble building, through the shattered window overlooking the ornate lobby that had wowed him. The bodies of these pale, Yoda-looking asshole decorated every countertop and much of the floor, as did the scorch marks of Forceful Githing, a skill he was fast becoming better at, and the shattered marble pillars. We have a new metal to add to the list of lightsaber-resistant materials. Rook said Beskar, Cortosis, Frick, Neuranium, and now this. What do you call this substance, Goblin? Goblin rots silver. Griphook told them through gritted teeth. Imaginative bunch. And indeed, he had been so surprised when his blade was stopped by the spearmen at the door that they had actually managed to injure him. Thankfully, that poke didn't hit any arteries, but he only needed to make that mistake once before, ensuring none of them got the chance again. As he entered the great stone building, he cut them down, fighting them as if they were Jedi. He wound up overestimating them, as their martial prowess, though great, could not contend with a Force user. He merely cut them down at first, but then larger goblins came storming out from the depths of the building with full-plate armor made of the silver material. Funny story, this goblin metal? Highly conductive. More so than gold, actually. What's more, none of these creatures were immune to being choked out with the Force. They felt like a stack of Sabat cards. And then finding the leader became trivial, as was killing him. I am pleased to find you so cooperative. Maul said, I came here hoping to test the capabilities of your people in this world, but near as I can tell you have no, magic to speak of. Then you are not as perceptive as you believe. Griphook informed him. It may behoove you to take a closer look at one of our weapons. Darth Maul turned on the dead leader and the silver rapier in his cold, dead hands. He picked it up and looked closely at it. He noted many carved symbols in what must have been these creatures' language. But beyond that, he could decipher nothing about the object, until he reached out with the Force. Swiftness, protection, strength. The words spoke to him as clearly as if the object had been touched by Sith alchemy. He could identify its exact properties: heightened speed and reflexes of the wielder, and protection of the item itself against age and damage. It was magnificent. Did these people specialize in applying their magic onto items in places like Sith alchemists of old? If so, they could prove useful. It was in that moment that the Dark Eye probe droids returned from their trip into the cave systems below the building. They transferred their data to his hollow projector, and he turned it on immediately and marveled at the Killik hive of tunnels it displayed. Wow, Cass said. There's an entire city down there. Indeed. Tens of thousands of miles of tunnels had been mapped out by the Dark Eye droid's echolocation, and they hadn't even finished. The long tunnels were lined with massive steel doors, likely as enchanted as these weapons. Why do your people live behind such impressive doors? Rook asked. Are you under such constant attack by Formize that would necessitate such living conditions? Griphook gave them a look as if he were looking at the mentally deficient. It was a look that Maul considered choking him over, but was more curious to know what types of enemies they were facing. Those are not our abodes. Your machines did not penetrate our tunnels deep enough to find our city. Those are vault doors. Griphook explained. Maul couldn't stop his eyebrows from shooting up as high as they could go. Rook's next words mirrored Maul's thoughts. What manner of creatures are you storing in those? Rankers? Rook demanded. Well, Maul's mind had gone straight to Rathdar and Voxen. But either way, he was dying to see what manner of creatures the Force parity on this world had produced that would need to be protected in such vaulted arcs of sorts. It likely explained how the civilization of humans on the planet's surface could thrive so peacefully if these goblins were tasked with keeping them preserved and contained. Creatures? Ranker? Griphook said, we don't keep living things in those vaults, you madmen. We keep gold, and silver, or copper, or gemstones. Maul looked to Rook and Cast. WWWWHYYY. Cast asked, do you also manufacture all of the world's electronics, or something? Electronics? What? No, it's money. Griphook said, this is a bank. The goblin was obviously losing his patience. But the purpose of this facility was readily made obvious. Maul, Cast, and Rook burst out in laughter. Oh, wow. This world is even less developed than we thought. You use scarce materials as currency here? Cast asked. Wow, I've never actually been to a world that does that. I have, said Maul. Very remote worlds with Stone Age civilizations, usually using shells or other such natural resources. Griphook was now looking between them like they were mad. What do you people use as currency? He asked. How to explain it to a person who used a wonderfully conductive metal like gold as currency instead of for electronic applications? Well, when you get to the point that you can travel amongst the stars, harvesting asteroids for certain elements becomes trivial. Maul explained, I could fly up right now and return in a week with an asteroid in your solar system so rich in gold it will devalue your currency to nothing. And that's with sublight speed travel. Griphook paled at this revelation. Our currency credits are based on the same thing most currency is based on: faith. Maul simplified, but also labor. The value is actually constantly adjusted based on who is guaranteeing it and what that group is valued at in relation to others. It's not how much gold, land, or wealth you have that makes you wealthy. It's how much wealth you can provide others. So a star system that specializes in mining has its own currency, as does another system that specializes in agriculture, and their exchange rate is based on that. Essentially, land, space, materials, and the like are so abundant in the universe that we all just circled right back around to plain old barter. Griphook developed a look of deep thought at that. That must require a lot of computing to keep track of the relative values of currency. He said, "Not really," said Cast. Firstly, most systems DO specialize in something like mining, agriculture, or some service or other, such as our people serving as private militias for anybody willing to pay. The value of our currency is based on how much people respect our ability to kick other people's asses. They rarely branch out, and even if they do, it takes a generation or two to fully retool and retrain a species or planet, and is almost pointless because they would have to compete directly with worlds that already fill that niche and have been doing so for millennia sometimes, so it's almost unheard of. Maul noted the dark look they shared at the reminder of their Satine KRYZ's attempt to force the Mandalorian people to do exactly that. Hence, why they were even here. So the currency exchange rates remain mostly stable. And what's more, most systems form collective currencies with partner worlds or systems, or are just outright part of the Galactic Republic, which issues and maintains a currency taking into account all of the above. Rook finished. The goblin absorbed all of this like it was as simple as basic accounting. And if this was a race of bankers, then surely it was. So it's an objective standard of value, like our gold-backed currency, but a relative one at the same time? Griphook verified. Exactly, Maul said. And the centralized credit makers are objective in determining the exchange rate without fudging the numbers. Griphook said in a completely flat tone. No, not once, said Maul, in a similarly sarcastic flat tone. The central bank has never been shown to maliciously fudge the exchange rate of a specific world or system for the benefit of bribers or friends. Cass said in that same flat tone. Or at least, not in court. Rook finished with a smirk. But that's because such cases never got to court. Ah, the joys of democracy and republicanism. Hence the Sith. Would their rule be fair and impartial? No, but it wasn't about fairness or impartiality. It was about having the power to enact retribution on all of this corrupt scum for the inevitably short period they would be in power before the cycle repeated all over again. The Sith were a necessary evil, made necessary by the slow, weak, and slippery evil that the Jedi and galaxy at large refuses to admit exists. And the joy on his face when he finally gets to carve the Muon leaders, Hutts, and Republic senators like carcasses would make it all worthwhile. If the Jedi actually did their job and wiped out the evil and corruption they claimed to fight, then the Sith would be unnecessary. God, he hoped the Jedi Neve woke up and became the force for good they claimed to be. Else he'd have to become a Jedi. Then finally he heard it, the sound he'd been waiting for. The marching of armored boots on stone as the cavalry finally arrived, or began closing in. He pressed a button on the hollow projector, and the elaborate map of tunnels was replaced with a hollow feed of the tunnel exits. Hundreds, thousands of the goblins spewed forth from the tunnels towards the bank lobby. He still couldn't believe this was a bank. Just a bank. They will not slow down nor show hesitance due to your having a hostage. Griphook warned with a vicious grin. And word on your abilities has already reached them. Maul returned the goblin's grin, though his held more mockery than malice. And I'm sure their magics allowed them to adapt their armor for protection against my lightning and telekinesis. Yes? He confirmed. Well then, it's a good thing I won't be fighting them. Griphook nodded. Well then, it's a good thing I won't be the one fighting them. Maul said, Oh, and will your 2 soldiers be the army to finally take down the Goblin Nation? Griphook boasted. No, said Maul with a grin. My army will not be making war with you. He reached into both robe pockets with both hands and withdrew 2 devices with identical function but different designs and held them up to the light, admiring the 2 tracking devices that the Jedi and Dooku had planted on his ship. Their armies will. he declared as the bombardment from Republic and Separatist ships began outside. Harry groaned as he lifted himself off of the rough asphalt and fought the pain from his many scrapes. Scrapes seemed the wrong word to describe how high knees, thigh, hands, and elbows had been reduced to ground meat. But scrapes was the best word he had for it. Finding his wand where he had let it inside, he managed to at least clean all of the scrapes with a Scourgify, which felt like every inch of the scrape being picked clean with tweezers, and gritted his teeth. Fortunately, the spell didn't open the rapidly forming scabs like he feared an actual water charm would do. With the wounds cleaned, he reached a shaking hand back into his robes to fish out the vial of Wiggenweld potion he had been forced to keep on his person at all times by Snape. He mentally thanked the greasy professor for the first time in his life. Downing it, he felt the scrapes knit themselves back together, the instant relief giving rise to the uncomfortable itching of a healed scab, but on each of his injuries. What he wouldn't have given for a steel dish scrubber right then. But then he remembered where he was and how he got there. Sirius, Ron, Hermione, he yelled. Over here, Harry. He heard Hermione's voice from behind the wreckage of Dung's van. He sprinted towards the voice and came around the wreckage to see Ron and Hermione leaning over a black, shaggy dog. If Sirius was hurt enough to revert to Padfoot, it must be bad. He's unconscious, but I have no idea where or how he's hurt. I'm scared to move him, Hermione told Harry without preamble. He crouched next to them to look at his dog father, and his concern rose. His breathing was shallow and broken, and he was shaking all over as if from cold. Definitely in pain, even while unconscious. With what little medical knowledge he had, mostly absorbed from being hurt so often himself and put in Pomfrey's care, the best he could guess was that something was broken or ruptured. Or both. Either way, they couldn't risk moving him, but also had no way to identify what was wrong with him or heal him. Their Wiggenweld potions couldn't heal organ damage or broken bones or even bruises, only minor external wounds like cuts and scrapes. And even then, only to an extent. Harry's recently knit together skin was already taut and tender and starting to burn from all of the movement. We need to call for help, Ron said. Who should we send a Patronus to? I think headquarters is closer. Send a Patronus? What? How would a Patronus help them? Harry, send a message with prongs to headquarters. Tell them where we are. Hermione said. How would that help? He asked. And do we even know where we are? Hermione looked at him in disappointment. Harry, are you telling me Professor Lupin didn't teach you how to send messages with the Patronus? She asked, dumbfounded. And we're just south of Diagon Alley. That ought to be good enough, shouldn't it? Before Harry could explain how he hadn't even known the Patronus could send messages, all of their attentions were grabbed by a loud crash of rubble just up the street. Standing up, they each turned to look at it, pointing their wands and ready to strike back. They backed down just a teensy bit when an honest-to-God tank rolled onto the street. Well, not so much rolled as hovered. The crescent-shaped vehicle was covered around the base with holes that Harry was certain could fire lasers nearly as large as the giant cannon on top. Just had it the minutes beforehand. That it shared the same color scheme and design philosophy as the robots marching beside it told Harry exactly what enemy they were facing. He stepped forward all the same, hardening his face and his heart for a fight. Ron? Hermione? He asked. Have you gone completely army? Ron asked in obvious offense. After all we've been through, you have the gall to ask? Honestly, Harry, what's gotten into you? Hermione told him as they both stepped up to stand beside him. We stuck with you through trolls, Cerberus, basilisks, dragons, and mermaids, but you think we'd run away at the first apocalypse by alien invasion? You give us too little credit. She was right. He needed to be better about that. Chapter 10 Preview. Ayla Secura finished her slice into the exhaust shaft from her hiding place in the maintenance shaft adjacent to it. It had been days since the battle on that Mandalorian space station, and the hunger was getting to her. Condensation from cooling units for this machine, and that was the only thing that kept her burns and cuts from infecting and her from dying of dehydration. But she needed food. She needed it desperately, and the droid command ship was sorely lacking in it. And sneaking onto the transport carrier had borne none either. Droids need not eat, who knew? She wasn't crazy enough to sneak to the Nemoidian quarters or dumber still, Dooku's quarters, wherever those were. So she had instead smuggled onto one of the carriers and waited. Deep meditation saved the day, but she was never great at fasting meditation. She was always more of a doer, and today, finally, the carrier took flight. They were landing somewhere with enemies who were likely people. And people have food. She'd just have to fight her way to it. Based on the sound of the flashing of metal on metal and storm of blaster fire, she heard from beyond the exhaust pipe a fight she would have. And so, through the hole she went, being careful not to touch any of the surrounding metal with bare skin. With her hands wrapped in her robes, she scaled down the pipe towards the light and noise, emerging into bright, yellow sunlight and a storm of spears, blaster fire, and arrows. On instinct, guided by the Force, she ignited and raised her lightsaber and blocked something long and green and made of light, but that felt like the Force died where it touched. She screamed and backed away from the hideous feeling, resisting the urge to cut herself off from the Force to not feel it anymore. My goodness! Came a high-pitched, hissing voice that she could instantly tell belonged to an incarnation of the dark side most foul. Aren't you a delightful little thing to look at? Good reflexes, too. She saw the speaker and blanched. She knew it was human, or supposed to be, but so twisted by whatever dark side rituals he had resorted to in a pursuit of something foul that he now resembled a Nemoidian crossed with a Trandoshan. Here she was in desperate need, and one of a Womp-Rat burger facing down an obviously powerful Sith Lord. I know not what a Womp-Rat burger or Sith Lord is, but one sounds delicious and one flattering. So, thank you, said the reptilian man. Oh, he was in her head? That could prove problematic. $1. NonsensicalRants. Become a patron for just $1 to get all chapters 2 weeks early and vote on future updates. If I don't reach a livable wage by July, I will probably quit fanfiction forever. If I do, I will be able to write full-time and jump from 1 chapter per week to 5 chapters per week.